in the whole of SADC region. 13%. On a GDP of 270 billion, we are collecting only 13%. This makes it very, very difficult for government to implement government public policies. And the irony is this: the corporate tax in Botswana is the lowest in the region. It's 22%. It's the lowest in the region. And we are collecting only 13%. Collected the level of Afghanistan. So there is a serious problem here. One wants to plead with business to work with us for us to create jobs, to build roads, to pay civil servants. We need to pay tax. I'm not saying people here, I believe that all of us here are paying tax. I'm just saying those who are not here should be asked to really start pulling their socks in terms of paying taxes. Otherwise, when people say that you start having serious problems, why would people be saying that when a GDP of 270 billion, matata being that hariri loosened. And that basically says, as a government, we also have to be very, very bold in taking serious decisions. I'm not saying people should be fired, because probably I'll be the first, because so I don't want to go into people should be fired. And ladies and gentlemen, the other challenge, as I said, is the issue of youth unemployment. The business needs to work with government to ensure that we create job opportunities for young people. But that really calls for government, together with academia, to work with business to create the right programs and training that business requires. It's not just a question of Ruta Macroeconomics University of Botswana. It also is important for the lecturer or the curriculum to speak to what the industry requires. That is why Ramael is going to be very, very important to look into the TVET program. TVET program should speak to what the industry requires. The TVET program should be developed in collaboration with the industry. Otherwise, every year in and year out, we are spewing to the market and we are unable to absorb. And this is very, very dangerous for any government. If you're having more and more young people sitting there unemployed, it can create a serious problem for government. So, mine was just to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen. It is true that I'm not a guru, but if people want to believe that I'm a guru, I'm happy to receive, as they say at church. I'll be more than willing to receive that I'm a guru. And thank you so much. And Program Director, you can take over. I don't think I'm the one to welcome the President. The Minister is there to do that. Thank you so much.
Chief of Staff, Office of the President, Dr. Oupa Tsheko, ke a go leboga moeteledipele wa rona. Soon after the new government settled in, newsrooms across Africa were abuzz with the exciting news about a seasoned journalist with over 3 decades of action, an award-winning editor, media consultant, Harry Britton Fellowship alumnus, graduate of the Women in News, WAN IFRA Leadership Accelerator Program, former chairperson of the Botswana Editors Forum and the Secretary General of the Africa Editors Forum. And I do believe, I dare hesitate, it was the Voice newspaper that best put it in November 2024 when Boitumelo Maswabi wrote, and I quote, "Rapid formation of cabinet this week has captured public attention and sparked a wave of optimism. Key positions are bearing testament to President DGB's commitment to merit-based leadership and gender inclusivity." This exceptional woman, ladies and gentlemen, and that was the end of the quote from the Voice newspaper, will be taking us through the opening session. Last night on BTV, she passionately illustrated that Botswana wa itobola, wa pola tse di kgologolo tse di neng di sa mo siamela, a bo a tsaya tse di neng di mo siametse, a kopanya le megopolo e mešwa jaaka re le mo dipakeng tse dišwa. Please don't take my word for it. She's here to confirm the quote herself about shedding old skin and growing new skin. Ladies and gentlemen, Botswana's Press Secretary to the Office of the President, Me Emang Mutapati.
Thank you very much, Giselle, for that introduction. The President of the Republic of Botswana, Re Duma Gideon Boko, ministers here present, eminent persons here present, Me Peloitletse, Emma Peloitletse, the Permanent Secretary to the President, Commissioner of Police, CEOs here present, board chairpersons, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you all. Mine is just a simple task, actually. It is to introduce the next speaker. But before I do that, let me just say, business is an extreme sport. That is from experience. 70% of businesses that start startups collapse in 5 years. 90% of them, actually 90% collapse in 5 years, and 10% of those collapse in the first year. So that's why I'm saying business can be an extreme sport. It can be equally rewarding, but also very dangerous to your health and to your financial status. That is why it is very important that government and the public sector should come together and talk about the revitalization of this economy, the rejuvenation of the economy, and the growth of the economy. And at this point and juncture, I would like to invite our next speaker to the podium. This is a powerhouse of a woman who's truly a gift, not only to the nation of Botswana, but to the world at large. I'm talking about the Botswana Stock Exchange CEO. The Botswana Stock Exchange Board Chairperson. Give me a few minutes. The Botswana Stock Exchange Board Chairperson has actuarial training with the Institute of Actuaries in the UK. She has an executive MBA from Oxford University and a BSc Honours in Actuarial Science from the University of Wales. Her areas of expertise are capital allocation, private assets and liability, aware investing, and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, this woman is award-winning. She's renowned for her innovative contributions to the investment industry. This phenomenal woman has led groundbreaking solutions that earned her prestigious awards, including Investment Week Investment Woman of the Year, Large Firms Award in 2022, and the Young Investment Professional of the Year in 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Neo Mooki.
Thank you very much, Emma, for that beautiful introduction. And Kia leboga bagaetsho for having me here.
I will start with the introduction and acknowledgements, although I know they've already been made. So, President Gideon Duma Boko, Chief of Staff, Dr. Oupa Tsheko, Cabinet Ministers and Assistant Ministers, Permanent Secretaries, BSc and CSD board members from across here, CEOs of companies, members of the media, the business community at large. The President asked me yesterday to speak from the heart. So I'm going to go off cue from what my team asked me to talk about and speak from the heart. When I was 6 years old, I wrote my life history in a little book. It wasn't a diary, it was a declaration. I was 6. Because I felt that if God could write his vision for the world and for humanity in a book which was called the Bible, then maybe I might be justified in writing my life in a little book. So I filled the pages of my dreams, going to Oxford, becoming a boss at a top investment firm on Wall Street or Tokyo, or living a life of abundance and achieving things that felt impossible for a little girl that came from the type of family that I came from. And again, we were very poor. And at the time, I laughed at my own audacity. But today I look back and I realize I was not just dreaming. I was writing history before it happened. Because here I stand, having checked every box in that little box. I made it to Oxford, off my own back. I now lead a high-performing team at a multi-billion-dollar investment firm in Italy, in Milan, 800 billion, soon to be 2 trillion. Fingers crossed. And this is the power of intention, it's the power of strategy, and it's the power of committing your vision to paper and committing to it. And this is why we're here today. As Botswana's business community, we're not just participants in the economy, we are the authors of its future. What we strategize here today, the commitments we make here today, the plans we put into action, these will shape the history of our nation. The time for vague ambitions is over. Let us write down our vision today. Let us make real commitments and take action so that when the next generation looks back, they see today as the moment Botswana stepped into its destiny. Mr. President Tautun, thank you for bringing the business community together at this critical time and for allowing the stock exchange to host this event. We are fully behind you and we support your vision for revitalizing our economy. And we look forward to your keynote address today. We have heard your call to action, Tautona. Botswana, which was once amongst the world's fastest growing economies, now faces numerous challenges. High unemployment, of limited economic diversification, widening wealth disparities, amongst many other challenges. However, adversity breeds opportunity. This is an exciting time. It's a time to build. As the Italians say, meglio piangere con occhio solo. It is better to cry with just one eye. Ka Setswana, re se ka ralela yaka batho ba sena tumelo. Even in difficult times and challenging times such as these, there is a silver lining. And with resilience, with vision, and with the leadership we have today, we can turn these challenges into catalysts for transformation. I was asked today to introduce to you the BSE's vision and its role in the economic revival. But first of all, I wanted to thank you, Tautona, for recognizing the BSE's potential to help drive the much-needed economic turnaround of our country. A turnaround that will be powered by diversifying away from diamonds. We must diversify and we must do it now. The BSE understands the role we have to play in that effort. The BSE is not just a marketplace for shares and bonds. It is a platform for economic transformation, a place where entrepreneurs, SMEs, corporates, and government entities should be able to raise capital needed to turn ideas into industries. And we are well positioned to help with this. Why? Because as of today, the BSE's market capitalization is over 750 billion pula, with 32 listed companies and 120 debt instruments. These numbers tell a story. Our capital markets are strong and robust, and the BSE is profitable. And although we are proud of this position, we know we can do better. We need more SMEs to list so they can grow and create jobs. And we must attract multinational capital to fuel our economy's growth. We must facilitate funding for infrastructure through capital raising on the BSE. We also need to tap into the climate transition finance transition to power our economy in the same way that the UAE is doing. And we must make the BSE a truly Pan-African African hub. This is exactly what global financial centers like Singapore did, because in the 90s, Singapore market was practically non-existent. But by creating, through intention, an investor-friendly environment and embracing regional listings and fintech innovation, Singapore has become Asia's leading financial hub. Do you know this was delivered via its stock exchange? So we can and we will do the same for Botswana. That I promise you. Our vision is for the BSE to become the premier capital raising hub for Africa. Remember this, because I'm going to say it over and over. We're writing history today, so remember this. We are going to become the premier capital raising hub for Africa. So how are we going to turn this vision into reality? Let me highlight very briefly a few key initiatives that we're focusing on. We are expanding access to the debt market in collaboration with the Botswana Bond Association to allow more Botswana and more international investors participation. This year, the BSE will launch a dedicated SME fund, and it will provide capital to SMEs that can't access bank loans. It's already underway, and we are leveraging the relationship I have in the market through a company that I fund and has already done the same, and they've done funds in other countries, including in South Africa, and we're doing it now. We're gonna list SOEs, leveraging on the success of the BTC, which propelled tens of thousands of Botswana into ownership. This will broaden citizen ownership of our economy and will ease the burden of government finance of those entities. We're going to increase listings and market liquidity, and we are going to attract international and sustainable investment through actively positioning Botswana as a preferred listing destination for Africa and global companies, and championing sustainable finance to tap into the global ESG investment capital. And finally, to truly ensure that Botswana benefit from these opportunities, we must democratize wealth owning shares, investing in bonds should not be reserved for a select few. It must be understood and must be accessed by all. This is why the Botswana Stock Exchange, we will be creating community-based retail options that ensures that everybody can build wealth through capital markets. We will couple this with financial literacy campaign aimed at shifting everybody's mindsets from consumers into owners and investors. So these are some of the initiatives that are already on our agenda to deliver, and they are already underway to make the Botswana Stock Exchange the premier capital raising hub for Africa. Now let's talk about accountability. How many times have we had bold grand strategies, promises, only for them to disappear into thin air? In Italy, they have a saying for this, aria fritta, which means frying air. And I have to say, there has been a lot of frying of air over the years, but not today, not in this room, not with this team. You see, there was once a British politician who, in the heat of a campaign, declared that if the Labour Party won the election, he would eat his hat. Labour won, and rumor has it, the man disappeared and no one has seen him since. Now, Mr. President, at the BSE, we believe in accountability, not escapology. If we say we're going to do something, we will do it. And if we don't, well, I won't promise to eat my hat, but I can promise you this. These commitments, they're going to be KPIs, they're going to be tracked, they're going to be measured, and they're going to be delivered, because that's the standard we hold ourselves to. That is the standard that you should hold me and my team to. No aria frita, we're not frying air. To deliver on these, we need to collaborate with the private sector, invested, listed entity, regulators, the government, and the business community at large. Through this collaboration, we can unlock the best of Botswana and position our economy as a shining beacon in Africa. And as I said earlier, for many, the stock exchange may seem a distant, something that belongs to the elites. But the work we are doing at the BSE is not just about capital markets. It's about people. It's about transforming the lives of everyday Botswana by shifting their role from employees and consumers to consumers and investors, owners. Mr. President, this is what a truly inclusive economy looks like. It's about an entrepreneur gaining access to our SME fund. A cattle farmer in Mashoro owning a share in their value chain because they're owning shares in their meat distributor that is listed, the BMC. Or a single mother in Mulepolola who's working at Sefalana or Chopisi having a stake in the success of this country because they're owning shares in that company. We must be intentional in making sure that wealth is not reserved for just a few, but something that belongs to all of us. This is the future that we aspire to build through these initiatives, and that is why the BSE matters. Now, to realize this vision, we need strong leadership. And it is a pleasure to introduce our new Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Oupa Tsheko. He joined 3 days ago, to be exact. Oupa, I joked about immediately throwing him in the deep end by having him deliver this speech today, but I decided to give him a bit of breathing room. But make no mistake, Oupa is no stranger to deep waters. He brings a wealth of global experience in financial services, and he is exactly the heavyweight leader we need to turn these commitments into reality. Oupa, please join me on stage so everybody can meet the leader who will take our markets into new heights. Welcome, Oupa. I would also like to invite my team, which is my management team, to stand up. I know we're running stand up, my management team, Thapelo.
Now it's Botswana's turn to rise its name in the history books. We have the talent, we have the vision, we have the fire, and we have the potential. But potential alone is not enough. We must act. The Botswana Stock Exchange is not just a marketplace. It is a catalyst for transformation, a bridge between ambition and opportunity, turn into industries and investors.
In the economy that the president always talks about. It aligns with the human rights-based led government and economy. So we are very thankful for that. And thank you also to Re Oupa Munyatsi, who has been at work with us the whole time as our financial partner, making sure that this event is delivered on time and with great facilitation. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is a man who is a voice, a leading voice of the private sector in the country, with a solid background in telecommunications and technology. He has been instrumental in driving Abaricom's growth, offering innovative and secure digital solutions across various sectors, including home, corporate, and mining. President of Business Botswana, Re Neo, today is the day for Neos. I had Thapelo, there are many Thapelos, but today we're also gifted with gifts in the house. So I'm here to introduce Re Neo Nwako, the president of Business Botswana. A round of applause for Re Nwako as he comes to the stage, ladies and gentlemen.
President, Advocate Duma Gideon Boko, honorable ministers, all invited guests, please allow me to stand on the protocol that has already been said so that I ensure that I don't miss a step around protocol. Coming from the private sector, protocols are not natural for us. We tend to react to the realities on the ground. There is a gentleman by the name of Albert Camus in his book, The Fall. He talks about the true horror of existence. And he says the true horror of existence is not the fear of death, but it is the fear of living and waking up each day to the same issues. Waking up every day to the same deceit, to the same pains. And the reason I'm going to talk about this fear of living, of existence, it's because that has become the genesis of the private sector in Botswana, President Boko. As I stand before you, the business community, on behalf of you, I want to take this opportunity and say, we only have one bullet. We only have one bullet. We have to be marksmen today and tell the president as it is. Tell him about the plight of the Botswana private sector, of the Botswana business community. But before I do that, President Boko, I would like to just share with you the truth about Botswana private sector. Because this is a day of reckoning, and the theme talks about collaboration to map a new forward. I will take this opportunity, as my namesake has already said, we are not going to fry the air, so we are going to tell the truth. For the last 30 years, we have seen a very robust, successful private sector in Botswana. We see a very matured financial services sector. You can go on the Botswana Stock Exchange, you can go on to the other, see how competitive our financial services sector, especially the banks, to see how they're doing. Some of the banks sitting here have profitability exceeding of 1 billion pula. For all intents and purposes, that shows a very matured, robust private sector. We have seen in the tourism industry, which has been led by the private sector. You can go back and look at those listed companies on the Botswana Stock Exchange from the tourism industry that have continuously over the last 30 years been doing well, creating jobs in the country. We can look at mining. We can look at the successes of your Botswanas and your successes of other mining institutions. But truth be told, over the last 15 years, somehow we decided to derail. Though there were melodious songs of having a private sector-led economy, saying, Botswana, we are a private sector-led economy. In the last 15 years, we've seen a lack of dialogue, a lack of contestation of ideas between private sector and the public sector. We've seen the proliferation of state-owned enterprises, left, right, and center, crowding out private sector. That has become a norm over the last 15 years. But we then say we are a private sector-led economy. We've been disingenuous and dishonest to ourselves. And I'm very happy to be standing here and saying, President Boko, thank you for creating this opportunity for us to re-engage, to collaborate, and to indeed ensure that the private sector are the engine of growth. It's through the private sector that we will be able to create those necessary employment opportunities that you've promised to the electorate through your manifesto. And we stand committed as the private sector here that Raizu, we support your vision. we have the ability and the capability as the domestic private sector to ensure that we deliver on your promise. I was deliberate in giving those examples of some of the matured private sector sectors such as tourism and mining and of course financial services. But if you go even further in the secondary enablers such as telecommunications, you will see that over the last 10 years in terms of performance, in terms of coverage per capita, in terms of connectivity per capita in Africa, we are right there in the top 3. Not to say that we don't have challenges. We still have challenges. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But for us to fully realize and achieve this work, it's going to be through deliberate collaboration, deliberate contestation of ideas, and trust. In Setswana, there is a big word, ya neelano. There is going to have to be a change of mindset. And we are going to ask the government of the day to please also trust us as private sector, as the business community. As today, we agreed that it's going to be a day where we are going to share ideas and also probably demystify, some of the thinkings and some of the things that we read and we see. And I know I'm going to touch on one or two few controversial issues, and it's fine. I have the protection of the president because the president has said he wants us to be open and real and share views. We keep on hearing this word repetitively about diamonds having lost their shine, diamonds having lost their shine. If you look at the top 10 performing companies, entities in the world, 8 are in the digital space, and 2 are in the luxury market space. One is LVMH, and the other one is Zara. What's common about LVMH and Zara? It's that they're into luxury brands. What's relevant to us as a country? It's because our diamonds are a luxury entity. So if we sit here and see LVMH's value being more than $350 billion US dollars, the value of DBS being said to be 4.1 billion US dollars, what does LVMH do? They sell bags, champagne, cognac. Ow, but really, are we going to say bags, cognac, champagne are more important than our diamonds? Maybe, Mr. President, we are not doing something right about how we are positioning our diamonds. And that is the reimagination, the rethinking that you talk about. Maybe we are too fixated around people who don't want to see the success of what we naturally have as a country. Just food for thought. Food for thought. What I mean in real terms, have our diamonds really lost the shine? We saw the proliferation of Hong Kongs about 20 years ago. Indeed, they were welcome because they leveled the playing fields. It suddenly made a lot more people have the ability to be mobile. But the real, genuine, what we call genuine cars, still had their markets. I'm sure if Borre Dada were here, Borre Tiboni, they will tell you what, in terms of their sales, despite the proliferation of Hong Kongs, they didn't see a dip in their sales. So we should not be scared of lab-grown diamonds. They have their market. Our gem diamonds have our market. And that pushes us into the issues that are inherent around us as a people. When we talk about the new buzzword that has been said over the last 10 years, ESGs, Botswana, from the first day that diamonds were discovered in this country, the policies that which we formulated, how we are going to manage those resources, already spoke to those ESGs. We've been a very responsible government. We've been a very responsible people around looking after our environment, around making sure that our mineral endowment benefits the country at large. So, even as we gravitate now towards the new opportunities, what are the real opportunities for us as a country? I don't talk about diversification from diamonds. I talk about growth opportunities. As we speak about the green economy and what it portends, we already have inherently structured environment. We already understand the issues of ESGs. So the multiplier effect of honing in and focusing around green technology in terms of carbon credits, decarbonization, green bonds, that creates immense opportunities for us as a country. And it is through focusing around these opportunities that, President, we will be able to heed your call of creating jobs, of creating new value for Botswana. And that has to be our focus. We need to be intentional, we need to be deliberate around it. We need to have a clear roadmap. When you ask anybody from the business community or any Botswana, even a child going to school, or what is the roadmap? What's the road that Botswana is undertaking? It's very, very, very clear. I support you, the President, on us focusing on green economy. But that is the heavy lifting that we will do as a country and that we propose as the private sector. We can't have a lot of things that are heavy lifting because we've got limitations in resources, right from your finances, from your capabilities, from your people, from your research and development, just from the whole ecosystem that is required to be able to drive economic growth. But we've got two other less heavy lifting required, but things that are based on a huge unity from the various institutions in Botswana. You throw a stone, you hit a graduate, be SMME funding. So that SMME stroke startup funding, we need to also be deliberate around the startup funding. And that is what's going to invigorate the startup economy, and that's what's going to create the future unicorns. Remember when I started, I said, if you look at the top 10 companies in the world, 8 of them are in the technology space. So it only makes sense for us also to be deliberate and intentional around reinvigorating that industry, especially with the fact that we do have the talent and the capability in young people. We just have to do a bit more self-belief in ourselves. And lastly, because I don't have the whole day here, trust me, if I did, there's just a lot that I'd be willing to share with you that comes from the business community sitting around here. But we take real pride and pleasure in orchestration of this very important day of collaboration. And thank you to the Botswana Stock Exchange for taking this initiative. And thank you to the Office of the President and to the President himself for availing himself and agreeing to put himself in the firing line with the business community in order for us to discuss, to context, and come up with ideas that will indeed create jobs, that will indeed drive our economy to greater heights. We are not going to create the Switzerland of Africa. We are not going to create the Singapore of Africa. We are not going to create the Dubai of Africa. We are going to create the Botswana of Africa. And the Botswana of Africa, it's going to be founded and created by the very heads that are sitting around here. President Boko, in 2 weeks' time, as Business Botswana, we will be coming over to present our full document that speaks to the reforms that we propose towards ease of doing business, to the initiatives that speak to employment creation, including the impact that it would be able to create in terms of economic growth. So we will do that in 2 weeks' time to present our final document. Thank you very much. Pula ene.
Another massive round of applause for Nwako. Nwako seems to be the man who has been listening to the president a lot, talking about shake, shape, and shock, shake, and shape. He's asking, have we been disingenuous? Have we been disingenuous and dishonest in saying we want a private sector-led economy, yet doing something else? Are we fixated on models that don't help us? He is being controversial. He's pushing boundaries. But this is the right platform, because at the end of the day, all those questions should be answered and will be answered and must be answered, and commitment should be made that people can be held responsible for. At this juncture, I'll ask Major Zal to take us on.
Ke a go leboga nkgonne Emang. Truly, truly, no jokes, this is a dream come true to be collaborating with you on a high-level stage. So I'm pretty thrilled about that. And thank you so much to leadership from Business Botswana. Nkgonne ne ke reditse ka tlhamalalo, ebile tota ke dumana le wena ka kgang ya artificial intelligence hub mo Afrika. Ke dumana le wena gore we have the capability from the digital citizens that are the youth of this country, right down to us, their aunties, whose voiceovers give artificial intelligence platform a human condition. Exhibit A, if you will. I'm sorry, but the person you have called is unavailable. Please try again later. Tobetsa 1, go retsa gape. Well, at this moment, ladies and gentlemen, as you try and separate me from the lady on the phone, which might be a bit difficult, I'd like to invite my nieces and nephews from the secondary school choir of Mogoditshane to give us a musical engagement before we continue with the program for today. You're an exquisite audience. Thank you for the energy that you're sending on the other side. A little bit later on, we'll be taking our very first tea break before we break into the panel discussions. And I'll be sure to indicate for you exactly where you may be located. I will inform, however, our first 2 rows that the ushers involved in today's organization will be taking you to the promised land for your tea break. And most of us can enjoy tea break options either out in the outdoor garden as well as at the exhibition foyer. Back to Mogoditshane Senior Secondary School Choir.
Mata komukorumela. Ara no gonya la ba di sala tharapana. Nakana ke mofoko. Taba tsukari ke mofoko. Are tsatsila umpeno rentsele kokoro kokwani. Ele ruri mabodi unkwa thebana. Ele ruri thakwa pele. Setswana sa re thakwa moragwe ga tapile ga tilente. Tsatsila go pelo rentsele kokoro kokwani. Rentsele kokoro kokwani go ta gwatla. Tirisano mo go tsedisha. Ga mo le go aga setšhaba sa rona. Go aga Botswana o mosha. Tsatsiero kana bagologolo ba re thakula lesha. Le bewa ha go dimo ga le legologolo nna kana ke mofoko a re le ruri mabogodi nkwa thebana ke re monga meboko o re tla ka mananeo re tlo tshema re tlo tantaboga ke re tsatsila go pelo re hano tsatsila go pelo re hano ka togamano a gaga Botswana o mosha Botswana o montle Botswana o phaphaselang ke re kana monga meboko re hano ba ba sa go itseng ga ba itse re o mogaka wa ga gola ka magatlapa a iphitlhele go magageng a go gabane ba ga molela ga mere mo ganong la go pane magatlapa a sala ga maregile kana ke ra tsintsila go tsentserebetsa e tsentse le skru ka re tsitsiritse ba se go bone mo gata mo kotonyala se taba robelela kelelelo le masapo ka setse mane le wena can you hear this well articulated though Pusity cannot take in men anyway. In this era of dog man, dog wild, Maro Tikitani, Kemo Foko. Arekare Kemo Foko. Kemo Foko. Kemo Foko. Ele ruri mabogodi nkwa thebana tsatselo re ntsele kokoro kokwani re hano tsatsila gompeno go tla go ipirela Botswana ke re monga meboko a ko re etelle pele o tla o duma ka ra itse gore o rama bokoboko e re ntse o palamanonyana a tshipua mahatsheng o tsamaye o ye go nkgopola mongame o tsamaye o itse gore mo lefatsheng le le ka kwano o saletswe ke talente e ntsi ke ra talente mmankgekana kana ga diphala e senang phalana ke lesimo mofoko are kare ke mofoko are mongame boko kana kitso le rama bokoboko a ko re etelle pele tsatsi la gompieno o ntlhatswe ngati o sege tema maeboy le nna re ta go sala morago gore na malata ra ge setšhaba o re etelle pele o itse gore le wena wa bona mongame gore re molora re felela tseleng ditagi di re feletsa bana ke re mme nna ke le mofokodi ke fokolla Setswana sa gae ke fokolla talente a banna bagolo le basadi bagolo kana ke ra bathunya thogo ke ntse ke re ke mofoko are kana go ke tswang teng ga nke ke tsamaya hela ke nna ke tsamaya ke dumedisa bagolo ke re le teng Batswana mo lapeng le teng bagolo le bame go ke tswang teng ke rutile go dumedisa nna mosimane wa mosesane kana ke ra le tlhanapana le letshesane ke ra nna mosimane kwa ga mmabeisi a kgama nna kgaleke ke a kgeleketla ke ra kwenkwentle marapo a thata ke tla ke šoma jaaka segwana se lebagane le phego jaaka segwana se lebagane le phego ke tla ke tshwere talenta go tswa kwa ga mmabeisi a kgama re tla re tswa Mogoditshanesina re tla re le tshwanetse talente nna mme ke tla ke re ke mofoko mofoko kare ke mofokodi a go tsatsi la gompieno re tle go aga Botswana o mošwa gore go se ka gare tshotsho sentshonyana sa ga tshwane ke tshwanetse kana ga ke tshwane le kgomo e tshwana e tsebedi matsopodi ga ke ka le tsenya ka le hitshwana ke re gana go tla go ikagela taemane ya bokamoso ke ra bokamoso ba dikokomane tsa rona nna ke tla tsamaya ntse ke le mofoko ke mofokodi kare ke mofokodi kare ke fokolela Setswana sa borre Setswana sa borre Setswana sa bogologolo re ntse mo mollong ro rile mollo re bua dithamalakane tsa Setswana ke ra bontle bo bokanakana ke re mongame boko ke tla ke duma ke letse ke sa hatlhala le mala ke ra le tlhawa le tsatsi gompieno ke sa bona la le sepe ke sa se tsenya mo maleng ke ra go tlo ntshwara ka letsogo mongame boko o mphe masego le matlhogonolo gore ke hetsa malatsi a mabedi a mararo ke sa tlhapi ke ra ke sa tlhapi masego le matlhogonolo a o mphileng nna ke mofoko kare ke mofokodi a re kana ke tla ke tswisa tlhatlharuane tlhakatlhakano megale go garatagala tsebeng tsa banthatiro ba nthatelo e ta ba nthatang teng nna kgaleke ke a kgeleketla ke tlo go kokomana pelo tsa banthatiro ba timetse pelo tsa bone go reetsa mofago ke tla ba o neelang gore ba o tsenya mo teng ga tlatlana go sa le le tlatlana nna tšhampana ntšhatšhe ke go tšhatšhe o itšhatšhe re tšhatšhane mmagwe tshikitšhane ke mofokodi kare ke mofokodi a re tsatsi la gompieno re ipela la tlhaba letsatsi go ba re tlhano tsa dirata re to kopanela moono le mongwe fela ke re bangame wa ke tswang teng ke lailwe Kana to go balabala ga ngwana a se botlhale go balabala ga ngwana a se botlhale ga ke rana ke batla go tlhalana direte mongame wena mongame boko wa duma ka se dupapula o tla o chama re tshwaretse mananeo o tla o phuthulutsa ka sone se dupapula mongame ke re o se thunya o na le tsana ke tla ipoeletsa ka re o mogaka wa go kgagola kaka magatlapa a iphitlhile ko magageng a ko gabane ba gamolela gamere ba ga no la gopane magatlapa a sala gamaregile ke re tsintsira go tsentserebetsa e tsentsere sekuru ka re tsitsiri itsetse nna mofoko mofoko a re Setswana sa re dula makwatiri di kwatabolola mo go ba bangwe ke re mongame boko a ko o dume ka tse di shama boy re ta go sela morago rona malata kana tšhaba rona e hella mo mmu o tlo re agele o re tsweledisetsa ko pele mongame ga ke rana ke tlhalola direthe ke ile
Thank you so much.
And of course, that was magnificent.
Yeah. All of us who have teenage children can tell the ages of these children. And I can tell you, boys and girls, when you have the opportunity to stand before a microphone at your age, great things can happen. See me after class so I can tell you about how a 43-year-old woman used to work on radio at the age of 16 and is now a high-level event MC. You're very kind, Kyaleboch. He was recently in the United States of America to witness the launch of BotSat-1, our first satellite, as part of his working visit to the United States of America. He was accompanied by BU's Vice Chancellor, Professor Totolo, whom I do believe is amongst us this morning, as well as other senior government officials. As noted on itweb.africa, BotSat-1 will provide real-time data to support national initiatives in environmental monitoring, agriculture, disaster response, urban planning, its capabilities positioning Botswana as a growing player in space technology within Africa. Digitization, the digital economy, sustainable energy, these are some of the keywords of focus for our new administration. We might all recall that his first 100 days were themed as a period of renewal and restoration, focused on 3 interconnected pillars: restoring trust, Nwako, revitalizing the economy, and building equity. So one can almost likely anticipate the spirit of these pillars in the conversations that will shortly unfold. He is credited for the conclusion of an agreement which has been 5 years in the making, and one of the representatives of De Beers said on record, and I quote, "What I find extraordinary is that through the energy and determination of the President, the Vice President, and particularly Minister Kenewendo, who graces us today, within the first 100 days of this government, we have successfully concluded the agreement," close quote. Well, with this in mind, I believe that we can safely say that this is a man that intends to honor agreements and see them through, a critical attribute for the purposes of today's engagement. As he rises shortly to deliver the keynote address, I humbly implore him to please linger a little longer on the stage for a group photo just after his speech. Now, I think we have all said these following words many times with great hope and anticipation whenever we see him on television, online, print, ever since he gifted us these 3 simple yet powerful words: I therefore say them with the utmost faith, patriotism, conviction, and on behalf of everyone that has yet to say them in his presence, that's my boy. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the captain of the Voyager, that is the Republic of Botswana, President, Advocate Duma Gideon Boko.
Pray be seated, as they say in Parliament. Let me begin, as always I do, by gratefully acknowledging each and every one of you here individually and personally, and thanking you for being here with us, with me. The chairperson of the Botswana Stock Exchange says, democratization of wealth. That shall be my theoretical springboard, if you will, today. But let me salute her team from the Botswana Stock Exchange, and remind myself what I always tell myself: finance is a bad master, but finance can be a good servant. Thank you very much, Botswana Stock Exchange. Let me acknowledge those that I work with in government, the ministers, the deputy ministers, permanent secretaries, all government officials. I recognize you. I see many from business that I know, and many that I will know imminently. I recognize you too. Those who keep us safe, take good care of us. See folks from the Army. Commissioner of Police is here. Commissioner of Prisons. I'm sure DIS is here somewhere. We are safe. We are very safe. So thank you very much for the pleasure of your presence here this morning. We are wrestling with persistent and trenchant problems. We've been wrestling with them for a while now. We are still wrestling with them. We are wrestling with massive unemployment across the breadth and dimensions of our country, especially youth unemployment. We are talking about the unemployment of young people, bristling with life, with vitality, with promise, looking to all of us for their very survival. We have a huge responsibility. We are wrestling with the reality of an economy that is unequal, presenting astounding levels of income and wealth inequality. We rank among the most unequal in the whole world. alongside South Africa and Namibia. In relation to Namibia, in their defense, they will cite their long struggle for emancipation from apartheid South Africa. In the case of South Africa, they will cite apartheid itself as a mitigating circumstance. I've examined our circumstances and asked myself, what do we have that speaks for us and even remotely justifies these grotesque levels of income inequality? I have found painfully little. There seems to be very little, if any, justification at all for the circumstances in which we find ourselves, these circumstances of inequality. We are wrestling with institutions, practices, styles and patterns of behavior that are outmoded and don't serve any useful purpose. We cling to them and cling tenaciously because we suffer the problem, the challenge of institutional fetishism. We fetishize these institutions, these inherited dependencies. We hold on to them for dear life. We cannot imagine ourselves without and outside of these institutions, and yet these institutions don't serve us. And so I welcomed the remarks from my homeboy. Him and I are from the same village. I don't remember seeing him when I was growing up. I don't know where he grew up. I know he's from Mahalat. And I grew up there. I knew about him. He approaches some of these matters with a level of irreverence, what I've called respectful disrespect. That's the touchstone. That's what I want. That's what I want, because I don't want occasions such as these ones to degenerate into redolent self-congratulation or a gracious exchange of flattery. I want us to speak the truth to each other. Speak the truth to and about power. Very important for us to do this. To engage in some vicious head banging, bang our heads together. Because we can't build that which we cannot imagine. We've got to reimagine this country, reimagine this society in this day and age of the knowledge economy, imagination. That aspect of the mind, my professor used to say, that is neither modular nor formulaic. Imagination is not modular, it is not formulaic. It proceeds in insight by combining everything with everything else and defying its own methods and presuppositions. We've got to imagine the adjacent possible and venture into the realm of the far removed, the speculative. In the world of mathematics, they call it recursive infinity. In other areas, they might just call it prophecy. When you venture into that space, you begin to see. You become a marksman who will hit a target others cannot see. This is what we are called upon to do today. We have an economy that has presented us with jobless growth where there has been any growth at all over the years. we have to reimagine this economy, democratize wealth. What does it mean to democratize wealth? It means to recognize the unnumbered throng of the masses of our people at the margins of our economy, leading lives of exilic marginality in their own country, in the underbelly of a society that claims in its vision 2016-2036 to be caring and compassionate. That has exposed them to subhuman existence and claims to care and care deeply about them. It is about those on the downside, the poorest of the desperately poor. We must hear their voices too. Not just hear, we must heed their pleas, their conjurations, their visceral cries of pain and anguish at the lashings of the abject, the gruesome levels of poverty that we've subjected them to. As a government, it's a mea culpa. We must take full responsibility. We are guilty as charged. And we're here to openly acknowledge these faults, these foibles, these shortcomings, so that we begin to identify those creatures of flesh and blood that are languishing at the margins of the economy. They are crying out for jobs, for a decent job. Not just a job, a decent job. What is a decent job? In appreciation of these propositions that I will intransigently make and defend, the first is that poverty in and of itself is a violation of human rights. Poverty is a violation of human rights. That's the starting point. If we accept then that poverty is a violation of human rights, we must acknowledge that there are many in our society whose rights are being violated as we speak. We must realize, and this is a function of a framework that I adopt, very simple, basic, rudimentary framework. The is and the ought. The is describes where we are, and this is what I'm speaking to now. These levels, staggering levels of poverty, income inequality, marginalization. We are a country of divided citizenships. There are those citizens who use public transport, go to the public health facilities, cannot afford private health, cannot afford private education. These ones that you saw here with so much life, so much verve, so much vitality. Yet they come from very challenged circumstances. Dilapidated schools. Their parents go to health facilities that are crumbling. You saw them. They belong here too. And we are called upon to address their plight and their predicament. And so I made a pledge to them and to the country that I will fight for, promote, and uphold their fundamental rights, the right to a decent standard of living, the right to be treated with dignity and respect. How can you then be treated with such dignity as we envision if you're unemployed? You have no access to any investable resources. You have no access to land. What hope is there for you? We must offer that hope to them. Business operates in this environment. You require skilled employees to drive and power your enterprises, your businesses. You must demonstrate some care and concern about the circumstances in which these employees of yours exist. And you must make it your business, as business, to attend to their business. It must become your business. Consciously, deliberately, make it your business. So we articulate decent jobs. And I make another proposition which I make boldly and I make intransigently. I make unapologetically. These decent jobs must attract decent living wage. Beginning to step on toes now. I apologize in advance. I articulate a baseline, a standard below which our people must not be allowed to exist. We've put a figure to it. We say 4,000. That's the living wage. It's a very bold proposition, which I defend, as I say, and defend intransigently, defend unapologetically. Why do I defend this proposition? I defend it because it marks and defines the lowest level that our people must subsist at, not below. I articulate this proposition because it also flows from economic data that has been marshaled by leading economists across the world. They suggest that when you reward labor, your staff turnaround is not what it always is, where people are coming and going. You retain. And when you retain, it's a huge saving on the cost of onboarding new workers each and every time, which is a cost to your business. So there's a mountain of evidence indicating why this is a correct proposition. Aside from the fundamental human rights precepts that I articulate, it also makes economic sense to pay and pay well. That when you reward labor, you minimize absenteeism. You raise substantially the levels of productivity in your business. And one of the ways of increasing your profits is upping the levels of productivity. And you increase these levels by rewarding labor well. And we are also told that when you pay well, you also contain what they call decision fatigue. When they are motivated, they will take better decisions. So there's every reason to pay the 4,000. And at this point, I'm merely signaling. In the legal profession, when a court will render a decision that changes the way things have been happening, it signals. We call it signaling in the common law. I'm signaling. The Botswana Stock Exchange has come to the party, not the political party, to the party, to forge a durable, sustainable partnership or a whole array of partnerships that will enable us to take the first steps towards democratization of wealth, bringing into the mainstream of the economy those on the downside. It's a bold move by the Botswana Stock Exchange. I applaud this move. I appreciate it with grateful humility. And I implore others to make their moves as well. We expect those moves to be made imminently. In the next few days, in the next few weeks. And you must make those moves because one of the things that I noticed was that for many years we've had what we've called our National Development Plan, which is debated in Parliament, which has in truth been the government's plan. We are in the process of fashioning, as I speak, the real National Development Plan, which is National Development Plan 12. Every single one of you will participate in the crafting of that National Development Plan. When we present it on the floor of Parliament later this year, in October, it must truly be a national development plan, fueled by many rhythms and patterns, with the input of every single one of you and more. So that when we proceed on that plan, the plan itself is inclusive. Democratization of wealth, democratization of planning for the redistribution of wealth, the equitable redistribution, not just a mere attenuation of inequality through tax and transfer. No. It's a different ball game that we are getting ourselves into. And so all the institutions that we have in our society must shape up, they must change. Beginning with government itself, government must change the way it does things. I've said so many times, I say it again. One of the biggest problems of government is government itself. And so government must change the way it does things. Must move outside the old molds, these old patterns and paradigms, and begin to reimagine even the institutions themselves that comprise government. Very important. There's a lack of agility in government. Government is often unresponsive, supine, lethargic at the best of times. And this can be very frustrating, especially for business. So we're trying to inject some agility, some vitality into the workings of government itself. So we are reconfiguring, reimagining many of the institutions that constitute government. It's very important. You must play a part in this reimagination of government. Government is a human artifact. You created this government. You created all these successive regimes that have ruled this country. You created them. You acquiesced in whatever they were doing by commission or by omission. At times with your affable indifference, smiling at them and yet recognizing that they were deep failures, faults, shortcomings, and not voicing them out. You acquiesced. You were complicit. You were accomplices before and or after the fact to the inequities that took place in this society. All of us, we were there. We are guilty as charged. So we must openly acknowledge our own foibles, our own faults. The better then for us to refocus on how we reorganize, reconfigure government. Parliament is another institution operating on the conventional and the commonplace. What happens in Parliament? What should happen? Before I get to what happens, what is it that should happen in Parliament? Our Constitution says Parliament must make laws for the peace and good governance of this country. Section 86 of our Constitution makes it plain. There is no ambiguity. It speaks in forceful, evocative, mandatory terms. And so Parliament is independent and supreme in the function of lawmaking. What is it that impedes, that frustrates you the most? It is the legal framework that is over-regulatory, that is incongruous, that is often contradictory, self-sabotaging. That is what you are facing on a daily basis. And how can we change this? By ensuring that Parliament makes the right laws to facilitate your ease of doing business. I'm being practical now. Aristotle says you can look at problems at two levels: the intellectual reality and the practical reality. I've now descended to the practical, brass tacks. What is it that must happen? Laws must be amended. New laws must be enacted. The existing ones must be repealed, some of them. We need to acknowledge this. And when we do, we must then go back to where the fountain source of the power of lawmaking lies, and that is Parliament. Is Parliament making laws? How many laws have been made since Parliament sat? Very few. Why? Because the order of business in Parliament is not consistent with that constitutional function that is bestowed on Parliament. Make laws. And I raise this question here because I want you to put pressure on Parliament, on your members of Parliament, your representatives, the politicians. Put pressure on them and say, the reason we are in this quagmire is because you folks are not doing your job. You are not passing laws for the order, peace, and good governance of this country. You are not passing laws that make it easy for us to do business. You are not doing your job. And so you see a lot of showboating taking place on the floor of Parliament, a lot of grandstanding, a lot of intellectual vacuity. People not doing what they're supposed to be doing, asking questions, moving motions. What motions? What questions? Your job is to make laws. When they make the laws, they bind the executive. When Parliament passes a law, all the president must do, once it has been passed on the floor of Parliament, he must do one of two things: sign, assent to the law. If he doesn't like it for whatever reason, he will send it back to Parliament and say, there's a problem with this law in these regards. Parliament takes a fresh look at it, and it is open to them to return the same law unchanged to the president with a 2/3 majority and say to him, sign this law. And at that point, he must either sign or dissolve Parliament if he feels very strongly about it. So we must be talking here at a level where Parliament or members of Parliament say to you, to the populace, we've presented this law to this president who has blatantly, stubbornly refused to sign. You'll pass judgment then on the president. This is how these things work. And so what do we see in Parliament? This august house of honorable people. And they insist on being called honorable, by the way. If you don't, you have disrespected them. And if you check the Hansard, when I was a member of Parliament, I never called anybody honorable. Because respect must be earned, not commanded. And so they spend 90% of their time in Parliament asking questions. When is the window of that classroom in Mogoditshane Senior Secondary School going to be fixed? You've brought this to Parliament about a window that requires fixing. We are not saying the window must not get fixed. But is this the right forum for this grievance or complaint? Couldn't you have gone to the relevant authorities and just dragged them by the hand and shown them the window and asked them, please fix this thing? You want to go to Parliament and expend time, temporal and financial resources so that people debate the fixing of a window in, my goodness. I've called it time theft. Failure to appreciate what your core mandate is. And the next, motions. This House requests the President to set up a commission of inquiry. Request. You are requesting. You are begging. When the Constitution says you can command the President. How? Make laws. That's your job. So these institutions must reimagine the very operations that they have become hostages of. We are all willing hostages. We've never paused to interrogate the real role and responsibility of Parliament. We've not done it. And then there's the judiciary. Now those ones become hothouse plants. If you expose them to the sunlight, they will wilt and die. In a democracy, there's no sacred cow. We subject them to the most intense, vicious, uncompromising, unkind sometimes, scrutiny. And that is what the courts themselves have said. In the case of Russell Mamabulo against ETV, the judges there say, they themselves, the judiciary, must be subjected to the most intense, the most probing, the most unkind, the most vicious scrutiny. So when you do that here, you get demonized. He's insulting the judiciary. No, there's no insult. We are subjecting you to some Socratic questioning. We want to generate a critical inventory about you so that we can tell you that it's time for change. So all these institutions must be subjected to probing, to scrutiny, so that they serve that overarching role of promoting, upholding the fundamental human rights of the people of this country in accordance with the Constitution. And bringing my wandering back closer home, here we are today. We have to invest in infrastructure so that we can attract foreign capital, foreign direct investment. We need climate resilient infrastructure, and we don't have it. Fact. If there was any doubt about that, the recent floods have put it beyond question. It's Kadit Kwa Estio. Beyond any question. We don't have climate resilient infrastructure. We must now begin deliberately and consciously to invest in infrastructure. We need to create efficiencies in our economy. There's corruption, there's wastage arising from inefficiency. Before we deal with the corruption, inefficiency. And that is why we must digitize this economy. To create efficiencies, make it efficient for businesses to function, efficient for citizens to receive world-class service, so that government does not simply provide universal coverage with substandard levels, substandard quality of service, substandard quality of education in the public schools, substandard quality of health care in the public health facilities. We need to now move aggressively into the digital space, the knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy is also about imagination. This is what we must do. We need to invest in our people. The real diamonds of this country are not those stones we mine from the belly of the earth. The real resource is the people of this country. We must invest in them. I take them very seriously. It is through their sacrifices that I was able to go through school and even go and attend some of the best institutions on the face of the earth. It was on account of the sacrifices that they made for me. What am I giving them in return? How am I extinguishing my debt to them? I must serve them, become their servant leader, champion and preside over this democratization of wealth. And so the initiative announced here by the Botswana Stock Exchange of creating a fund for small, medium enterprises is laudable indeed. It's a great move. It's a masterstroke. Now finance is mobilizing and deploying as a servant of the people, powering development. When we say the private sector must play a part, we mean in critical respects that you must fund some of the infrastructure development that the country requires. You must deploy resources. We want world-class roads. We want to build world-class airports. We want efficient border controls. We want the private sector to play a critical role in driving these developments. And you are all here today because you have a role to play. I acknowledge that role. I encourage you to play that role and play it actively. I encourage you to review the practices, the institutions, the modes of behavior of government and government officials, and to be vocal about areas that are crying out for change. And we must change all these areas so that we don't fall into the trap of institutional fetishism, worshipping institutions as if they make us, when we actually create and have created these institutions. Business must play its part. It is very important for you to do this. And so, I conclude on a light and cheerful note. When I was at secondary school, Madiba Secondary School, a public secondary school, many years ago, I organized a debate, challenged the teachers at the school to a debate. And the team that I put together had very interesting, colorful characters in it. But I then published, put on the notice boards, an invitation. And I was inviting teachers and students and everybody to what I called a revolutionary roundtable panel discussion. I was summoned to the office of the headmaster. Those that I listed as my fellow panelists were also, I was later to learn, summoned. And we were told each to bring our parents the following week. So I came with my father, simple guy. We sat in the headmaster's office, and the headmaster explained my offense to my father. Said, this boy is mobilizing a rebellion against the administration. My father was startled. They produced as Exhibit 1, the Manila paper, Revolutionary Roundtable Panel Invitation. And they pointed to the word revolutionary. This is where the problem lay. And my history teacher was called to come and define the word revolution to my father. Said, he folded his arms, pitifully looked at me and looked at my dad and said, revolution simply means this boy wanted to overthrow the headmaster. So my father looked in horror and said, why do you say that? He says, no, the word revolution. This boy cannot claim not to know the word revolution. He's a very brilliant chap. He knows. My father said, you know, Jesus Christ was a revolutionary. Martin Luther King was a revolutionary. That's what my father said. And he wrestled with them to try and establish what offense I had committed. And when we left that office, I had more respect and admiration for my old man. He had defended this rebel, this revolutionary. I think in that act, Stephen Boko, my father, had fueled the fire in the belly of the revolutionary. I'm a revolutionary. And a revolution sometimes is convulsive, causes shock and awe. And it is time-bound, cannot run forever. It is compressed in time, and it is concentrated in target. So we've defined what our targets are, the empowerment of our people, bringing them into the mainstream of the economy. And we are mobilizing, we're enlisting. The Botswana Stock Exchange is on board. Other businesses must come on board. Everybody must come on board. It must become our collective responsibility. It's a revolution. And that is why this revolution has no sacred cows. Even the president is not a sacred cow. If he is your boy, as he ought to be, then when he veers off course, or you think he's veering off course, you have the liberty to call him and remind him what the fundamental commitments are, so that we engage and we together recalibrate, find our bearings. This is what we are called upon to do. I'm grateful to the Botswana Stock Exchange. I'm grateful to BITC. There's some great work taking place there. I've said, and I want to say it here so that you join me in this affirmation. In the next 3 years, Botswana will be spectacularly different. And if we agree that we must do it in 3 years. And we also acknowledge that government operations and methods are outdated and slow and destitute of agility. Then something must give. It's urgent, it's desperately urgent. So every law that comes to Parliament must come under urgency. We don't have time. Urgent. We will expose them to debate. We will involve everybody. We will consult as robustly as we possibly can, but it is urgent. We must change these laws and change them quickly, so that you don't come and complain that you are impeded, you are obstructed when you try and do business. And I've said to all government departments, your job is to facilitate. If the law is a problem, find a way to get around it, to enable business and other initiatives to proceed. And in the meantime, we'll go back and change the laws. Because we made the laws, we can change them. So these are the issues, captains of industry, business people, citizens of this great republic. These are the questions and the challenges that we are called upon to wrestle with. And it gives me immense joy today to be with you, to wrestle with these problems together with you, and to find solutions, durable solutions. And I assure you, yet again, play your role. I call upon you to do so freely, without fear, without favor, without fear of any recriminations. Nothing will happen to you. Your work permit will not be revoked. Your residence permit won't be cancelled. You will not be declared an unwanted or undesirable person in the Republic. In fact, some of those who have already been banished have had that status of banishment removed, uplifted. We are a democracy. We must allow different schools of thought to blossom, different ideas to flourish, subject us to scrutiny, to criticism, even the most unkind. We must not be, as I indicated, like hothouse plants that will wilt at the slightest criticism. That is what we are called upon to do. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I thank you for the pleasure of your company this morning and the privilege of your kind attention. Thank you so very much. Ula. I was told to remain here for the group photo, and I will remain.
Thank you very much. Revolutionary President. Hey, that's all make my bitch. It's a man. Yo, I think I speak for each and every one of us who speaks like that in saying so. Well, ladies and gentlemen, at this moment, we are getting into the segment of the program, which is, of course, the first of several presidential photos. So I will say to our president, kindly receive your first and front row of delegates for this first photo shoot. That includes, of course, Honorable Mwasa, Honorable Nzima, BSE Board Chair, CEO of BSE, Business Botswana Leadership, BITC's Reolibile as well. as they make their way to the stage to join the president for the first of several group photos that will take place during this forum, allow me to share with you that one of Botswana's brightest music ambassadors shall serve as a soundtrack through the presidential photo shoot moment. By the way, Mr. President, I'm reliably informed that the choir and their teacher are also looking forward to the magical opportunity to be captured in revolutionary photography with you. And I shall leave it to the protocol team and host organizations' ushers to guide and coordinate the first series of photo shoots with the first row and then with the young people from Mogoditshane Senior Secondary School. Lekanna mo ditulong tsa lona, batsadi ba me, ke a leboga. So very shortly, I'm going to hand over to Sabaga Rabanting to serenade us for this segment, which should take about 5 to 10 minutes. A little bit about her. She's a young Botswana female music composer, event curator, performing artist, and teacher. She's going to be here throughout the day, so you can network with her, should you be so lucky. Otherwise, until then, Sabaga, ke a go rapella extra English in naka. Na ma o di tshwere jalo. Ke a leboga.
And of course, that was the President, Advocate Duma Boko, talking at length about the direction in which Botswana is moving in this new government. And of course, it was very deeply thought-provoking on so many fronts, on the part of various stakeholders, various professionals gathered here. I do believe got to get a lot of insights into what their responsibility going forward is in this whole value chain of transformative development. And of course, maybe in so many words, he wrapped it up to put at the forefront of it Botswana. The priority of having Botswana take center stage in terms of the direction in which government is moving in. The president said a lot in terms of what this new transformation, this new government is looking to. He reaffirmed and even called to the community here, the business community here, various communities from different sectors of development, calling on them to affirm and in unison what his direction, what his vision is in terms of the next 3 years for Botswana. He said it verbatim to say that in the next 3 years, Botswana should be spectacularly different. And of course, it's something that he often says in different platforms, rubber stamping it now and again to basically mention the fact that Botswana really needs to do the most. Botswana, across all sectors of development, ought to do a lot in the next 3 years in terms of realizing Botswana's potential and, of course, establishing her in that regard. He talked about the manifold challenges obviously affecting the economy, obviously affecting Botswana in general, in terms of unemployment, and of course the disparities that are very evident within the economy, the various inequalities, and obviously called for all stakeholders, for all institutions to be in tune with the direction in which government is moving in. He made a lot of pronouncements in as far as what government should do, and of course the government should change. He put it in those words: the government should change, and in terms adopt and in that regard adopt a lot of values that are important and that are instrumental to driving what government should look like and the type of shape the government should take on in this regard. He aspired for agility, vitality, injection, and of course bringing about a type of government that will be a government for the people. He mentioned doing away with old patterns and, of course, reimagining, refocusing, and doing things different on the part of the government. He mentioned the fact that, oftentimes government can be a problem in a sense by institutionalized systems that obviously he mentioned were old patterns that need to be done away with, and of course called on all organs in question to take up the level of accountability and the level of responsibility that needs to obviously unfold. And then he also took to talking about the fundamental priority of Parliament in terms of coming up with legal framework or legislation that will of course inform the direction in which Botswana is moving in different sectors of development. He talked about the aspect of being over-regulatory, and of course how this can also be self-sabotaging in a sense, and called for a legal framework that will be established on the part of Parliament in terms of ensuring that the type of laws that need to be institutionalized, the type of laws that need to play out ought to be the right laws. He said Parliament should make right laws to ease ways of doing business, and called on the business community to take an active role in being a major part of that, keeping government accountable and ensuring that Parliament does pass the necessary framework, the necessary laws that will of course bring about the desired growth. And of course he spoke to issues of substandard quality across various sectors of development, mentioning health, mentioning education, and how there needs to be not business as usual, bringing about certain changes, the much needed changes that need to obviously happen. And of course, even at the core of it, he talked about the need for investment in people, mentioning the fact that Botswana are the real diamonds. And of course this is not take away from the fact that Botswana does obviously have that rich resource, that rich endowment when it comes to natural resources, but also mention that human capital or the human resource potential is great and obviously ought to be leveraged and ought to also be optimized in so many levels. Obviously this high level forum is very big on private sector participation, and of course in that regard he talked about the need for the private sector to really go all out in terms of bringing about world-class infrastructure across all sectors of development, bringing about quality across the value chains of development. And of course, I do believe at this moment we can, in terms of unpacking the various conversations that obviously were brought to the attention of the community here, just speak to, a very talk to Tuele Surufo, who of course is the CEO of Botswana National Sports Commission, just to get your sentiments. Mr. Surufo, the president and obviously speakers before him also spoke at length about what this is and what obviously the direction in which Botswana is moving in. Let's maybe just talk about the president's sentiments in terms of private sector participation, calling on the private sector community, across all sectors to get on board. What are your biggest takeaways as a major contributor to the direction in which Botswana is moving in? As from the BNSC perspective, obviously we're looking at sports development, we're looking at what that really means in terms of the whole value chain of development. What really stuck out for you? And of course, moving forward, what does that mean for BNSC?
Yes, thank you very much. I think one of the things that he reminded us about as government is that we are supposed to be a facilitator,
right,
an enabler of business, of trade. And that perhaps we haven't been playing that role as well as we should have. And going forward, that we obviously need to reimagine and reconfigure how we do things. The president is obviously underscoring the important role that private sector plays in the development of our economy, the development of our country. Now, with us in sport, we've always talked about the potential that we have, but not much has been done to unlock the value that is inherent within the realm of or the sport industry. I mean, we've spoken about the extent to which sport and also the creative arts could contribute to our GDP. But we've mainly just been focusing on sport development, which is well and good. We've gotten results from sport development. Our athletes have won medals at the Olympic and other competitions. They have in the process profiled Botswana, which is good for tourism, which is good for possibly good for business. However, we haven't really looked at the business side of sport to unlock the potential that it has. And amongst other things, we should be investing in sport infrastructure so that we could host a lot of international events and bring tourists to Botswana who will spend money while they're in Botswana. We haven't looked at the manufacturing side, of Botswana to say, we are importing a lot of our competition gear, equipment that we use in sport, whereas in certain instances we have the capability, also given the resources, like we have cattle, for example, the leather from cattle and other products that could go towards manufacturing some of the sport equipment. We haven't really explored that, but we also haven't, in going a green or sustainable development, we haven't looked at maybe taking back some of what we've had, what we've imported, to then repurpose, to be able to provide the equipment and or other needs that we need to provide to or other needs that we have that we need to cater for. So those are some of the areas that we haven't looked at. Now coming to the private sector, surely all of that we can and should do in sport. To quite a great extent, the private sector has to be involved because government alone would be limited in supporting us. So now if government is growing, the SMME is growing, industry as a whole, that presents opportunities for us to partner with industry on some of this or some of these initiatives that we see in sport. So those are some of the key takeaways from what has been presented so far this morning.
And of course, you did talk about the fact that, you haven't been doing that. Obviously, talking about, the whole value chain of stakeholders, in terms of, taking that accountability. He talked about the real diamonds. He talked about the infrastructure part of things and, of course, what needs to be done there. But the real diamonds, we're talking about the athletes, the participants, those, your Isaac Makwalas, the next ones, the next generations that are coming. What can we say? What type of conversation can we have there in terms of, honing the talents that the real diamonds of Botswana have within the space that you operate in?
Yes, I think with our small population and the achievements that we've had to date, it actually goes to show that there is abundance of talent in Botswana. Now, we unfortunately have not done enough in terms of identifying the talent. There are some Yankees in some remote villages, Kachika and other places. Have we given them opportunities to explore their talents in different sport disciplines? The answer is no, we haven't. And why haven't we done so? Partly because of the resources the facilities that we spoke about earlier, but also other resources. So now if we were to have a broader talent ID program, number one, and then number two, once we have identified the talent, then we are able to nurture it all the way, until they've reached their true potential. Then certainly we would not just be talking about one Litsile Tebogo. We should be talking about a couple of them, in not just in track and field, but in soccer, in tennis and basketball and other sport disciplines. So hopefully what this will do going forward is that, like in the US and other places, we'll see the private sector now getting more involved in sport development, and us not just banking on the government of Botswana to provide the resources towards sport development. And when that happens, obviously, these athletes will eke out a living, meaningful, money they would make from that, and be able to plow it back, into the country, into the economy, support their extended families, set up businesses themselves, like we see a lot of top players from other countries have done in their respective countries. Yes.
What would you like to see? Maybe just in another question, he talked about the importance of Parliament now taking on the big role of making legislation that actually speaks or informs the type of development that we want to see, right? So in terms of the legalities of the legal framework, what would work? What would you want to see play out in that regard?
Yes, actually quite a few things. First of all, we've had an issue with the tax arrangement at the moment, which business has stated that it's not the most conducive. So we would want to see a law passed that makes it easier for the private sector to participate in sport and the creative arts. And that's number one. And then number two, when you look at our education system, maybe compared to, say, Aussie and other places, you would note that it's a lot more difficult to pursue a dual career in Botswana, where you are an athlete and at the same time you are a student. This is because, say when you go to, I like the University of Botswana, but you go to the University of Botswana, you are a BSc student, whatever stream. It's the program doesn't allow you sufficient time to balance your academic and sport, and in the end you are likely to fail in one of the two. Then that's when the perception that sports people are not smart, or smart people are not good in sport. But when you go to the US, to Australia and other places, they actually have flexible programs, so they can allow you to take a gap year without being penalized, and that's why we see them being a lot more successful than our people here.
There's so many takeaways, Mr. Sirufo. Thank you so much. I hope we can engage much later even more. Thank you so much for your insights.
Greatly appreciated.
All right. And of course, that was Mr. Sirufo giving us insights in terms of, what the prospects are and, of course, the aspirations with regards to, the sports industry. And of course, at this very moment, I would like to take a moment to speak to the Permanent Secretary to the President, who of course is Mayor Emma Pilwete, just to get insights. PSP, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. The President said a lot in terms of the direction in which government is moving in transformation. He mentioned something very important, and in his words verbatim, he mentioned that government should change. He talked about the values of agility, vitality, refocusing, and so many other things that need to be incorporated within government to bring about that change. What are we looking at going forward, even beyond this high-level forum?
As he has said, we are looking at a variety of issues. One of the issues that we are looking at is really to corporatize public service. Because if you look at what he wants us to do, we cannot be agile with the same structures that did not serve us for a while. So we need to change with time, and things become contemporary. As things become contemporary, we need to always be.
PSP, I do apologize at this very moment. It would appear that the President is actually on stage. They are having a panel discussion.
Needed to transform this economy lies with you as the industry captain. So when you ask your questions, let me plead that you please also put forward suggestions. Engage the President on suggestions that you believe would work for you. Now, before we proceed to take questions from the floor, I will pose one or two questions to the President, but him and I have agreed that the purpose of today's discussion is not for him and I to engage, but rather to give the platform to the private sector. Mr. President, welcome once again.
Thank you very much. I thought I was the one going to ask the private sector questions and have them give me solutions. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm sure as much as Botswana would have loved the thrill of a debate between yourself and myself, we've agreed today is not about you and I, it is about indeed the private sector.
I don't know how we've missed each other. When you were fierce on TV,
we will have our moment.
I was excluded.
We will have our moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I think just to kick off, Mr. President, just two questions. You mentioned earlier on that, to use your expression, something has to give if we are to transform this country. And one of the things that you alluded to was the need to make new laws, enabling laws, and to amend existing ones to be more enabling. And you requested the private sector to put pressure on members of parliament. My question to you, Mr. President, is can you commit in this forum as well, as head of state, that you will have, or you are prepared to have, the difficult conversations with your cabinet and with the members of parliament in that regard?
Absolutely. I commit fully. Cabinet has already been placed on notice in relation to many of the radical changes that must take place. They are ready. We also call upon business to take a proactive approach. The assumption is always that those folks in parliament or in government must originate ideas, laws. They don't have the kind of experience and exposure that you have had and you have. You've interacted, you understand the problems intimately, and are the best people to offer solutions to these problems. And I'm going to suggest to you, as I've suggested to other groupings, that one of the things that you must challenge yourselves to do is to formulate the kinds of laws that you want to govern you and regulate your operations. You must yourselves legislate for yourselves. And when you've put together these proposals for legislative reforms, you then submit them to the relevant ministry. The relevant ministry will then bring those ideas to Cabinet. Cabinet will instruct the drafting of laws that accord with what you would have submitted. This is now a challenge to you. And as I said, for a very long time, you have abdicated your responsibility. You are the true legislators. What do members of parliament know? Many of them have not been in business. They've not run businesses, much less successful businesses. So people like yourselves who are running business, who have run businesses, have the experience and the exposure, are outsourcing the function of making laws that regulate their space to people who are ignorant of the challenges and the nuances of that space. It's a dereliction of duty on your part if that's what you have done. So you've got to take proactive measures and formulate legislation, formulate solutions to these problems that you understand better than us, better than me even.
Thank you, Mr. President. One last question before we go to the floor. And again, I said I will place reliance on Business Botswana organizers to help us manage the traffic in terms of what questions we can take given the limited time. The last question from myself, Mr. President, to you is, even as we lament that as a nation we are not attracting enough radical quantum of investment to transform this economy, above that, there's also concerns that the government is sluggish in responding to people that want to transform the economy. There's concerns that there's a leaning towards FDI, sometimes at the expense of local investors. I want to hear your thoughts about that sluggishness, your thoughts about whether or not we are pro-citizen or local investors or otherwise.
Well, I've publicly acknowledged the sluggishness, the lethargy on the part of government, the unresponsiveness at times. And it is something that we need to address as a matter of urgency. Some of the constraints arise from this restrictive legislative and policy framework. The problem that we face normally in the public service is one in which it's a problem of what we normally call black letter law. You read what the law says, at its most basic, you read it and understand it as precluding or prohibiting some action. And when a person comes and presents a creative solution, you close it off. It is occluded on the basis of your famished understanding and interpretation of that regulatory framework. Now, I've given an example, and you know, in the Merchant of Venice, what swung the case there against Shylock was some interpretive ingenuity, where the lawyer says, you are entitled to a pound of flesh nearest the person's heart. And the man dances with joy and starts sharpening his knives because he's going to kill this man who owes him. Then the lawyer says, this contract says a pound, not an ounce more, an ounce less. It speaks with exactitude. It's a pound. Cut off a pound. That's one. Two, it doesn't say anything about blood. So cut your pound of flesh, shed no blood, it must be exactly a pound. That closed the case. So interpretive creativity, because when you construe, you are in fact constructing. So when they construe all these laws and policies, they construct barriers, boundaries, and barricades. So what we need to do is to approach these laws, these policies, from an expansive understanding, which is, what is the solution? And we purposively apply the law to facilitate the solution. And I'll give you an example. When we talked about hemp, the current legislative framework says, if you are found in possession of a habit-forming drug or narcotic substance, and hemp is in the classification, you'll be arrested and you'll be tried and imprisoned for about 15 years or so. And we say we want people to grow industrial hemp and medical marijuana. In the face of all these laws that are prohibitive, criminally preclusive, what do? And we had to sit and read the law again. And we said, in the penal code it says, if you are found in possession without lawful authority, we said this is the entry point, lawful authority. Somebody must then be capable of giving the lawful authority. So despite what the law says, you can actually facilitate through a creative understanding of this law to then create an avenue so that people can start growing, even as you go back and amend the law. In relation to many of the things that trouble you on a daily basis, we're going to have to adopt these types of approaches so that we facilitate you in the interregnum while we push the legislative amendments. This is my commitment to you, and you've seen it enacted.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this point, again, having said that we are limited for time, I will now open the floor and I'll lean on my organizers to help us identify the questions that we can take. I think at this point, given the limited time, we'll open maybe for no more than 5 questions. Business Botswana, I'm sure you will guide.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for facilitating this dialogue today. You asked for honesty, so we're going to give you honesty.
Yes.
I think our orientation as a society seems to be out of whack. When I look at the list of speakers at today's event, and this is very similar to other events, I see very little to no entrepreneurs on that list. I see a lot of highly paid employees of corporates, but I see no entrepreneurs on the list. And I think this is a symptom of a wider problem where we don't quite understand what entrepreneurs are and what they contribute to the society. And this is something that in entrepreneurial circles we always discuss behind closed doors to say, we keep attending these events with government officials who've never built a business from scratch and highly paid employees who also have never built a business from scratch, telling us how to be entrepreneurs, how to run a business. I think we have to fundamentally change our orientation as a society. We have to understand what an entrepreneur is, the pain that they have to go through, and the true sense of patriotism that exists in an entrepreneur's heart. So, second part of my question, second question really, is also regarding our orientation. The company that I founded, which employs about 300 Botswana, mostly youth and mostly women, on Saturday will become the first private company in this country to issue broad-based employee stock options, thereby resulting in the very democratization of wealth that we've been talking about this morning. This is a vision that I had when I started the company, that I wanted to change the narrative about creation of wealth, and that wealth doesn't only belong to a handful of people, but that it should be democratized. We asked you to hand these stock option grants over to our employees. The office politely declined, which is okay, that's within your prerogative. My next project is our family business, which we're planning to list on the Botswana Stock Exchange in a couple of years, which employs over 700 Botswana. My next project is going to be to give each and every one of those Botswana stock options in our company so that they can be broad-based wealth. And my question to you, Mr. President, is are you going to decline that invitation as well? And what does that say about what we are going to endorse as the political class? Thank you very much for accepting this statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please consider the event today as but one of many that will come. And consider it, if anything at all, a dry run. Testing, checking, are you there? 1, 2, 3. That's the first thing. The second is to acknowledge, first, that these conversations must include entrepreneurs. They must play a leading and critical role in these conversations. But it must also suggest something. You said you have discussed these behind closed doors. I think it's about time you came out into the open. Discuss these issues out in the open. Bring these ideas over. Engage. Engage because you now need to push this government, which is still finding its bearings in relation mainly to matters pertaining to business and your issues, so that you inform and guide what they do, you enlighten them. Don't assume we know. In fact, it is safer for you to assume we don't know anything. and to approach us then to educate, to enlighten, and to guide us. This is what I'm opening up to you. And the approach that you are taking, which is a post-Fordist, where, and this is what other businesses must now begin to consider in the broader context of the democratization of wealth. The option that you are giving of employees acquiring a stake in the business, you know, it does several things. The main one is to give them access to some ownership of the business. But secondly, and more fundamentally, because now you have turned them into investors in the business, it is also in their interests to ensure that this business, of which they are part, succeeds. And if we broaden it slightly further, if it were in the context of a unionized workforce, you would have less disruption or disturbance in the workplace. You would have less propensity to strike, because the people who would otherwise strike are striking effectively against themselves. And so, one, they will participate, and secondly, they will be meaningfully engaged at some level in the decision-making processes relating to the enterprise. So it's a great move, one which you must share now, as I say, openly with others, and which might just inspire other entrepreneurs to adopt the same route. And so it's important, and thank you very much for that. But as I say, and I've said many times now, you are entitled to audience with me, in the same way that you are entitled to have audience with other members of government. If I don't meet with you, it is not because I shouldn't. It may just be because of time constraints, which we can also manage as best we can. And so I am throwing it back to you and saying, feel free, come up, discuss, bring proposals for reform, proposals for change, ideas for improvement, and do more than what the folks are doing. Ideas as to who should be fired. Give me ideas as to how we can improve the system and make it work for you, for business. So, and the focus, and I've said this before in relation to the earlier question asked, we've focused on attracting foreign investors to the neglect of those who are already here. We need to engage meaningfully with investors, entrepreneurs who are here, understand their challenges, hear from them, and appreciate what can be done together with them to improve the environment and the ease of doing business for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's one of the 5 questions I will take. We'll take 4 more questions.
Morning, everyone. This is Wabona Kangwanyana from Innovative Consulting. Dumela Mungan. Just 2 brief ones. One is, I think first, the cracking of red tape and bureaucracy in this country will be a huge breakthrough. So
what?
The break in terms of bureaucracy and red tape that you referred to.
Okay.
But the question is, we have a bureaucratic system or government officers for 30, 40 years who've only known one way of doing things. So the biggest challenge is going to be how we transform them to be enterprising in terms of their mindsets. In other words, rules, laws, processes, can come, but the people themselves, we've got to see how we're going to transform how they think in terms of enterprising. That's the first question as to how the thinking is, how we can change that. The other one is really the politician in you and the politicians that are here. You know, we've seen Botswana burn and waste money through short-termism of the 5-year term, where projects are done where clearly they are totally unnecessary and wasteful. And we've sat there as citizens with nothing we can do. So I want to pose a challenge, because you've got 3 years, you've got 4 years, to say that level of desperation for survival, existential threat to politicians, how do you plan to manage it? I'm trying to borrow the nice language that you usually use. But I'm struggling as an engineer, you know.
Just before you take a seat, on the first question, just to make it clear, are you prepared to make a suggestion in terms of that transformation?
No, absolutely.
Yes,
okay,
please,
2 quick suggestions.
very briefly.
One is, which was once explored and never implemented, is to have ministers that come from the private sector on contract basis, so that you infuse enterprising and agility from people who have done it. And believe me, this country has got tremendous talent, not just in Botswana, but also in the diaspora, as I'm sure you are very well off. That's one that should happen. The other one is exchange. I've always played around with the idea of how can we change a PS to go and work in the private sector, and also having the private sector working in government, just to see how that can work as well. So just exchange programs so they can be exposed to how things are done.
Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Those are the two questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. The bureaucracy, the red tape. One of the reasons, and sociologists of different levels of eminence argue for some measure of bureaucratic arrangement of the affairs of society. They say it brings about some level of predictability. You know, people are drilled into how things must be done. Now, if that way of doing things happens to be the best at a given moment, it can work very well. But if it becomes overtaken by events, it becomes a challenge, because bureaucracy is difficult to change. And so we have this. The reason is we felt as a society that we need to have some predictability, some structure, how things must move. And what this does often is to create rigidity, inability to innovate, resistance to ideas that might change, because they are seen to be doing violence to the structure of the bureaucracy. This is the challenge. And you see, the bureaucracy is now institutionalized, normalized. It's part of the normative order. Now, in this order of normativity, you need to do several things. You need to begin to introduce practices and approaches that defy, that seek to transgress the bounds of bureaucracy. And one of the ways of doing that is what I've earlier suggested. Because this bureaucracy is legalized, it's stipulated in the law. If you encounter a person who's very conservative and rigid about their interpretation, you have a big problem. Happily, I hope in me, you have a revolutionary, a rebel of a guy who understands the law, lives within it but is not of it, and is able, therefore, to remove himself from it and see it from outside and change it. This we must do. But I have spoken with government officers. We assume they are impervious to ideas and resistant to change. Sometimes, and I've noticed, when the person at the top is not giving clear signals and direction, those down below either accurately or inaccurately adopt the posture of that person. And they do things thinking they are compliant with what he wants, when in fact they are going against what is expected by society. And so in my engagement with public officers, I've found many of them to be, and I'll tell you honestly, when I've addressed them, many of them broke down in tears, actually, literally. And it shocked me. And I realized these are folks who have been in some sort of prison. They couldn't express themselves creatively, robustly. And so I've said to them, and I've said to them, I'm a madman in the world of ideas. You've got to be crazy to deal with me. If you don't bring to me crazy, revolutionary, context-smashing ideas, we may be speaking at cross purposes. And this was an effort to free them up, allow them to dream, allow them to be creative, allow them to be rebellious against these routinized and collectivized and stylized forms of behavior, these institutions. And so I hope I've infused enough to them to suggest to them that we need to break out of the frozen mold of what has been happening so that we do things differently. The 5-year blocks, this is the fault of not just politicians, but society. You see, I've said, you elect people, and then you abdicate your civic responsibility of keeping them under constant check, because they have to do your bidding. If you don't tell them what to do, they'll do their own bidding. So tell them. How do you tell them? Write it down even. Push them to do these things. I've said 3 years. First, because I recognize that we are in a deep crisis. We need to turn things around and do that quickly. And to do this, we need to bend certain things until they break. And we need to do it within a limited space of time. So we have to change and change quickly. We've also got to create a grand narrative, a grand vision for the country together. That is not the exclusive preserve of a political party. This is the problem. You have abdicated your responsibilities to a vehicle called a political party, which is an aggregation of interests, some of them varying and disparate. And you think this is the vehicle that must run your life. And you go and do business away from constant monitoring. I'm saying to you, even as you elect a political party, an individual, make sure you lead with them. In fact, lead them. Don't allow them to lead you. So you need to maintain a degree of control over your own life and circumstances, so that this vision into which we all bring ideas must transcend the narrow constraints of the vehicle of a political party. In countries where they have monarchies, these are guys who know they will be in power for the next 20 years. So they plan in blocks of 50, 100 years. Politicians tend to be opportunistic, tend to go on political expediency because they want to win the next election. And so they engage in populist stunts. We need to keep them in check. And how do we do that? The democratic space is open for engagement. It must be a true contestation of ideas. I don't think all these politicians will fail to listen and to heed your expert advice, except maybe you haven't reached out to them. You haven't touched and pushed them hard. I ask you to do that. The other one about ministers, ministerial appointments. Well, the current constitutional dispensation, which is a blend of the presidential and the parliamentary, enjoins the president to draw the bulk of his cabinet from parliament. It's a constitutional imperative. We can worship it, we can idolize it, and immunize it from interrogation and change. But we can look at it and ask ourselves whether it still serves us. And this is now a beginning of that constitutional discourse that must open up when we discuss the comprehensive constitutional review that I've undertaken together with others to bring. These are the debates. When we engage in these debates, we will understand that these are very serious debates that must not be allowed to get derailed by pettiness, some pedestrian thinking, either in Parliament or outside of it. When we engage in this debate, we are now crafting this republic afresh. We have blended the presidential and the parliamentary. The president has immense powers in this republic. What Trump is doing with his presidential directives, I can do. I haven't done it. I haven't thought it is the best way of doing things, except when it is absolutely necessary. Because at the core, I want to open it to debate, engagement, so that it doesn't become a one-person factotumship. So we must look at these things. And then we will settle somewhere and agree. Do we separate truly the legislature from the executive? When we do, the executive, the ministers, will be appointed from wherever. That's when you bring people who are competent, who are technocrats, who will do the job. And then the politicians will sit in parliament and be a countervailing force of checks and restraints on any abuses and excesses on their part. And when there's a tug of war, the judiciary itself reconfigured and appreciating its role will then settle the disputes. That debate is coming. Prepare for it. I see you are already anticipating it, and I look forward to engaging with you on it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just borrowing from that question very briefly, Mr. President. The layer of leadership below minister, assistant minister, permanent secretary, that is within your purview as head of state. Borrowing from his question or extending his question, are we likely to see in this administration borrowing talent from the private sector for that particular level? Briefly, Mr. President.
You know what I think you should do? Second, experts to the, and I think it's an interesting intervention. Because I was talking to former Prime Minister Tony Blair. I had heard that there's a Botswana who works in his team. Very brilliant young lady. They tried to lure her back, but the salary and the benefits are prohibitive. So I coaxed Tony Blair. I said, there's this individual who's apparently very good. He says, yeah, I know her. Please second her to us so that she can come and assist us. He's coming here in the next few days, I'm sure. I will push this conversation. Now I'm pitching it to you. If you have this dynamic young person that you want us to consider, please, let's discuss. And the model that you are proposing seems, it holds some allurement, some appeal. I hadn't thought about it, quite honestly. You see, the beauty of engaging with characters like yourself. You bring some of these rebellious and radical and interesting ideas. It's a brilliant proposition, actually. I think we need to concretize, to discuss it further, and see how we can operationalize it. I don't think there should be any difficulty in doing so.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. That is question 2 of the 5. I'll now take question 3, please, briefly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Vikash Panangi from Business Botswana Trade and Industry Sector. Your Excellency, you've talked about ease of doing business repeatedly, and it's something that I'm sure every person in this hall appreciates quite a lot. The stance of government of late, at least I'm talking about the medium term past, has been how can we not help you rather than how can we help you. And I think people moving towards what you're saying, finding the law to actually run through and actually see how they can help business would be great. Now, Botswana over the last decade and a half has been steadily declining both in our international rankings of doing business and domestically on the ground. The cost of doing business, the ease of doing business has been steadily becoming worse. And that is obviously also a symptom of why we've got these unemployment rates. If business is easy, people do business. At the end of the day, I'm sure the Botswana Stock Exchange will tell you, capital is fickle in its flight. It goes where it's easier to make the return, or it goes where it's actually easier to do business, one of the two. So that brings me to the first of my solutions. Would you, as Office of the President, commit to reinstating the National Doing Business Committee under your office, having it chaired either by yourself or the Vice President, because I believe it will be imperative in actually getting these economic reforms moving. You talked about the window in the secondary school that has to be debated at Parliament. Not everything needs to come up to that level, but having something, the National Doing Business Committee, when it was functioning, was great to deal with a lot of operational impediments that needed to be dealt with, and also in elucidating the other things on the legislative side that needed to be pushed through or find a solution in the interim. So that's my first question. My second one is that in recent years, we've had multiple policies and regulations enacted that have been perceived, at least, to be detrimental towards business, in actuality or just in pure perception. The Vice President himself, in one of his recent discourses, has mentioned that these were not ideal for business, and maybe bad economics even, I think in his words, if I'm not misquoting him. And I think the basis for this is the failure to implement regulatory impact assessments. Before we bring something in, we're not really fully thrashing out what will this do, and is it going to bring about any unforeseen negative circumstances to the economy, the business, and the people. And considering the many laws that have been put in place over the last few years, would you commit, and yourself and your government, to actually doing regulatory impact assessments on the previous laws that have been put in place, which business perceives to be negative in nature, and also any new policies or business practices coming in place that must go through a regulatory impact assessment that will actually help that process of parliament that you speak of. And the last one, which is just topical, Mr. President, is over the last few weeks since we've had border closures around the country, we have seen a massive backlog of trucks and goods sitting at the border posts which are open. And this is due to the fact that we are a land-linked country. Everything comes through our land borders. Can you commit to making our borders operational 24/7 at the minimum for movement of goods, which are the lifeblood of this economy?
Thank you. Just before you take your seat, very quickly, just noting that you want commitments around the National Doing Business Committee, which currently exists, to the best of my knowledge, chaired by the PS. Are you asking for it to be resuscitated? Is that?
Yes, it's basically defunct and hasn't met in 8 years, so I don't think it's functioning.
Okay, and then regulatory impact assessment,
on
as well as
and new ones.
opening the borders 24 hours.
Correct, sir.
Mr. President, briefly.
Very easy, this one. I commit.
Sorted. Sorted. So
and
this
I
was to
commit because it seems like the right thing to do. It actually seems to me to stand to reason. We need to refashion institutions, create or recreate, resuscitate ones that worked well before, which have for some reason fallen into obsolescence. We need to have them back, and the one that you suggest seems like a great idea. The border issue is of great concern. It's of great concern, and we've already begun conversations with our neighbors, South Africa. With Namibia, I think we are now at the level of a one-stop border. We have the Martin's Drift, which is a catastrophe, and it creates pressure on the other borders. We are doing a number of things. One is to address the issue of the border with our neighbors and deploy resources to improve the borders. Secondly, we are trying also to bring back rail transportation so that bulk transportation goes by rail. And we have engaged in very firm actions in that regard. So the hope is that within the next 6 months, we will upgrade the existing infrastructure. We'll get the rolling stock operational. We will bring more locomotives, more wagons, and the hope, in fact, is that we will have a passenger rail service at scheduled times at the initial stages between Gaborone and Muchudi. Just to check, or Rasisa, just to check, and then maybe expand it as we go. But more critically, we want to expand rail transportation and have a concept of pit to port transportation via rail. These are ambitious ideas and projects. It's a clear and precise vision that takes us from where we are to where we must be. We need, and visions don't execute themselves. They're not self-executing. Visions need agency, human agency. Corporates, business must come in. And I'd also want to challenge you and say, I want you to be saying to me, here's what I don't want you to be saying to me, or I discourage you from saying. You guys have not done anything. I want you to say, here are the ideas that we gave you. We've refined these ideas over time and climb. You have been unresponsive to these ideas. Then I'll take the ideas. That is an idea, concrete, There was an entity that worked. Everybody understands how it functioned. All we need to do is to dust up the concept, populate it, and get it rolling. That's more the kind of practical solutions that we're looking for. So I challenge you to say, or to generate ideas that you think can work. Debate them amongst yourselves. Settle them and come up with a distillate of these ideas. Bring them over. You can bring them to me, can bring them to this man in a different capacity. He will ensure that these ideas are taken up, they are acted upon, and with that, I give you my assurance.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'll take the last two questions, and again, I'll ask that they be brief, but please note, as the President has said, this was a testing forum and for us to pick lessons. Clearly, there's more hands that I'm seeing, but I'm under immense pressure for time, so I'll take the last two questions.
Thank you, Ray Skorutsi. Thank you, Your Excellency, the President. I am Hulikanyi Situme. I represent the education sector, which really oversees the private, pre-primary, primary, higher education, including TVET. Just two quick ones, Reyes Skorich. One is that we have observed a concern about critical state parastatals and other institutions across sectors which facilitate the private sector. Just to cite an example, we have been operating without a very critical board, the Botswana Qualifications Authority Board, since June of 2024. And this obviously creates a lot of inefficiencies and jeopardizes sustainability of doing business, and in fact stifles growth. What is critical to realize, of course, is that with every new qualification or learning program that is approved, we create employment for 4 to 6 lecturers who deliver that qualification. And we also inject a new skill into the economy because that qualification will be recent and it will be relevant to the industry. So the question is, would the President commit that future appointments of such critical boards would be done within a month? In fact, in the interim, we had proposed that the management structures of the authority could actually approve the qualifications before them, and the board could ratify later. Because by and large, boards really don't look at these submissions with any deeper expertise knowledge. They rely on the recommendations of the experts. The last one is that since January this year, we have also witnessed a very high number of rejections of work and residence permits for head teachers and teachers who are employed in the private primary and secondary schools by government. While of course we agree, Your Excellency, that it is important to localize in private schools, we are also saying it is equally important to recognize that international schools have historically contributed to foreign direct investment. The multilateral companies that set up here, the foreign missions that establish here, do so because they have confidence in that your private schools have an outlook that is international in nature. And therefore we wish to request that His Excellency commit to a policy that would support international schools and maintain a certain ratio of foreign to local staff. We have actually proposed so in the past. I thank you.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask that the last question that we take, we be brief. Thank you, Mr. President. BQA board.
BQA, fortunately, when I was in the US recently with the Minister of Higher Education, we had occasion on the sidelines of what we were doing to discuss this matter. And the board should be in post by the end of this month at BQA. That's the one. The second part is this. I'm not sure how appointments into boards were conducted in the past. I was told that PEPA has a database. I've rejected the database, I must say, because I said, I don't remember seeing any invitation to all and sundry who think they have what it takes to submit their credentials for consideration. And so I would like for this process to start where people bring forth their CVs and they are then filtered for consideration, so that we just democratize it, if that we may call it. And then we will have a proper, credible database from which we will draw from time to time. The other one about a ratio, I think it's a matter that will require the line ministry. In this case, it would be the Ministry of Labor and Home Affairs, to the degree that it implicates work and residence permits, but also the Ministry the two ministries of education, child welfare and basic education, and the Ministry of Higher Education. We need to sit together and have a conversation. We will not, and that I commit to, engage in any conduct whose effect is to frustrate business. We will examine the pros and cons. We will engage in this delicate balancing exercise. But the end point must not be to shut out or behave in manners that prevent businesses from setting up and from employing the right caliber of staff. So to that we can very easily commit. But the details remain to be worked out between child welfare and basic education, labor and home affairs, and the Ministry of Higher Education.
With suggestions from the private sector.
With input and brilliant ideas from the private sector. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll now take the last question.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think your commitment not to take any conduct that frustrates business gives us comfort. Coming from the real estate industry, sir, I'm interested in saying 2022, the Tribal Land Act came into effect. It brought about SLT as an opportunity to democratize this wealth. 3 years later, Mr. President, I think I speak for everybody in this room and outside, we remain without secure land titles. What is it going to take? We commit, perhaps as citizens of this country, to do what it takes to help. From the private sector, we're ready maybe to come in with a project-based approach, because the deadlock is frustrating business. That's the first thing. And I think the second thing, of course, is to speak about the 100,000 houses that your government has committed to give this country. Indeed, a wonderful initiative. There is a persistent shelter crisis in Botswana. What role does the private sector play? We have a lot of private capital in Botswana, but the message that comes across is BHC will have 200 million to deliver. How do you let the private sector come in and anchor those efforts, Mr. President? Thank you.
Can I ask, before you take a seat, what suggestions at the private sector or contributions do you see yourself making in terms of reaching the, on average, I think that will be about 25,000 houses a year?
On average, that's 25,000 houses a year. What we're looking at, Mr. President, as I said, is private capital. There's a lot of, whether it's BPOPF, pension funds, whether it's our banking sector, and whether it's ideas Sometimes it's not even the funding models. Sometimes it's the ideas on how to do this delivery. And those are the things that we want to bring in.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secure land titles, the process is very slow.
The Tribal Land Act, I have a fundamental difficulty with the land question in this country, how it has been handled, how it is being handled. Now, these are my own thoughts. We have a three-tiered, if you will, tenurial system. State land, freehold, tribal land. We know what happens in relation to freehold. You hold title to it. You hold the title in perpetuity. There doesn't seem to be any confusion there. And this is a remnant, it's a carryover from the colonial era or the protectorate days. Tribal land, whose value is not even recognized by the state, by the government itself, is where the real problem lies. And I remember in Parliament arguing that we need to define, at the very least, a minimum size parcel of land which we allocate either to a household or to individuals on a freehold basis, regardless of where it is. Ramayela was the minister there when I made this crazy suggestion. Of course, it was roundly rejected. I still maintain we need to revisit these tenurial systems, in particular tribal land, so that we can restore value to that land. And you in the real estate business, land surveyors and other professionals need to bring ideas as to how we can manage the land question insofar as it relates to so-called tribal land. The narrow confines of the question you ask relate to secure title. Secure title probably might be a matter to resolve by some administrative fiat. Issue some edict and say, this is what happens, or change the law quickly. But the fundamental question of the value of the tribal land must then be addressed. When government expropriates, for instance, even government itself, tribal land, they take somebody's plowing field. The compensation offered is for the crops, if any. Otherwise, they take the land and they'll claim they'll go and relocate, they'll go and allocate you a piece somewhere else. And that piece may not be of commensurate value. And the value becomes difficult to determine because this land has been devalued over time. So we need to deal with the question in a broader sense, not just of securing title to something that is of less value, but securing title and at the same time seeking to unlock the value in this land. And that is where the real difficulty is. Because if we looked at it in this manner, we have a lot of undeclared millionaires because they are landowners, or they have title to land. And the value of this land is unrecognized. So first we need to appreciate the value and at the same time, secure title. And all the initiatives that have been tried, there was something called LAPCAS, failed. I'm sure many initiatives that have come have failed. We need to revisit the issue of land, address the immediate concerns, but also deal with the fundamental questions of value. And while on the question of land, because it has very serious implications for business. Just recently, a matter was brought to me, folks were taking government to court, and they had cited the president as the first respondent to their case, because some land that they claimed was theirs was being expropriated for a business idea. And so they were suing. And because I was cited, the matter was brought to me, and I said, oh, great. What is the issue? So these guys claim the land belongs to them. These are the lawyers representing government. And I said, my starting point is that, yes, it belongs to them. What else can we say? And that's the starting point for me. The land belongs to the people. And if you want to set up a business and you need a chunk of land in a locality, talk to the people. They will happily give you the land or access to the land. But I've said you must now group them into some sort of cooperative or trust that holds the title to the land and avails the land to the business for investment. And I've said this land that they avail forms part of their contribution to the project itself. You need the land, they have the land, there's a partnership here. You need to now start discussing value, equity. For them, the land being the contribution. You needing the land to run the business. And so this is how this matter was resolved very easily. And I said, no, I'm not litigating. Go and withdraw, go and file that we are not contesting this matter. And this is a standing instruction to all the government legal teams. Don't litigate against a citizen where you have clearly wronged the citizen. Don't litigate. Settle. This is the approach. And I've said, even where you could go to court and argue on a technicality, say this matter is prescribed. Yes, prescription absolves you. But the substantive justice or injustice of the matter lingers on. So I don't care about prescription. I don't care what technicalities you can marshal. Let us look at the substantive justice. And if we are wrong, even if the matter is prescribed, let us talk to this person and let us offer some recompense. This is the approach. This is a different approach from what has happened before. And this is the approach going forward. One that is accommodating, one that listens, one that empathizes with business, empathizes with the ordinary citizen, so that we don't mulct the citizen in heavy legal costs when we are in the wrong. This is the situation. And that's why you will see many of the cases that have been in the courts being settled. They're not being settled because there's any pressure on anybody. I'm a lawyer, I could go to court and fight. I enjoy that thing. But to what end? What purpose would it serve? What does it mean to the ordinary person who has been wronged? This is the question. And so we need to address these matters together. Don't assume I have all the answers. Sometimes I'm muddling through as intelligently as I can, needing your assistance. When we say a person came for court, it's an acknowledgement of our frailties, both cognitive and otherwise. We are saying we must have a certain hermeneutic humility to understand that the positions that we hold on which we are entrenched are actually revisable. We must listen to other voices, views, and viewpoints, and reconsider our entrenched position or position against the weight of what other views are presenting. And there's no voice more potent than the voice of business in driving and powering economic growth. So it is critical for us to do this. As we democratize wealth, we must democratize every space, open it up to vigorous subjacent experimentation. There are no hard and fast rules. We innovate, we challenge ourselves, we push ourselves. And this is what we must all do. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's all the time we had, and unfortunately we've exceeded the time that was allotted. At this point in time, I would like to bring the conversation to a close, but I think the biggest winner from this conversation is that the President has personally committed to bring back the Doing Business Committee, and I'm sure the organizers will take advantage of that to ensure that any other input that could have been obtained from this forum is directed to that committee so that the President can have or can give audience to the plight of the business community. I'd like to, yes, Mr. President.
I notice there are many questions that remain unasked and therefore unanswered. I'm going to suggest this was an initiative powered by the Botswana Stock Exchange. You are entitled to power a similar or slightly different or better or whatever shape or form of initiative as business, and invite me, and I'll come, and I'll listen, I will engage, I will learn, I will heed. So thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's been a privilege. Thank you very much for availing your time from a busy schedule, Mr. President, to spend time with the business community. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our conversation. Please rise with me to give thanks to the President for the conversation. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
Thank you, sir.
Can we please give one last round of applause to the President? Thank you very much. Director of Ceremonies, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ompile Suhurutsi, Advisor, Presidential Projects. That was the President's fireside chat, mapping a new collaboration, building the new Botswana together. Ladies and gentlemen, you may resume residence of your seats. Ompile has interacted with heads of government and policymakers and made the Eye the country's most watched current affairs program on national television. Ompile now serves as advisor to the President on projects. His role entails supporting and enabling the entire government machinery to catalyze and significantly improve project delivery, a challenge that Botswana has struggled with for decades. He has called for applause, but not for himself. Ladies and gentlemen, I do invite it for Mr. Ompile Suhurutsi.
Very insightful conversations coming in from President Advocate Duma Boko, and of course during that fireside interaction, where we also had various members of the business community coming out to ask very necessary questions in terms of the direction government is moving in, and obviously getting insights from the President in terms of various commitments. It was very interesting to note just how he was very keen on solution-based approaches that were put to him in terms of acknowledging them and listening, taking heed of what the business community had to say in terms of even offering possible solutions to some of the challenges that are affecting ease of doing business in Botswana. A very interesting one that I can remember just from the top of my head was one of somebody from the business community put to the president a solution around resuscitating the National Council, the National Committee of Doing Business, to which obviously he did acknowledge the fact that he does commit to that. That was very important, and obviously did attract heavy applause. There was also an issue around regulating impact assessment, and of course there was also to the affirmative commitment on the part of the president in terms of tackling that as well. And of course in terms of, he also did mention the significant value of having an inward approach. He did mention that in the past there was a heavy focus on establishing foreign direct investment, but it was more outward looking as an engaging community or business community outside of the country. But in retrospect or introspect now, there is a need, as he's mentioned, the need to be more inward looking. And of course, there are so many conversations that we can talk about with regards to what to expect today in terms of the various events, various conversations that will be held in the next fora that will happen, the next panel discussions that will happen during the course of the day. And I believe you can see at this very moment the President, Advocate Duma Boko, has officially moved out of the forum, and of course there's so many conversations that we can have with regards to what he said, committing, if you recall, to ensuring that Botswana it's not business as usual. And of course the next 3 years very interesting in terms of the level of commitment that was given. And if you were listening in earlier on, we did have a very brief conversation with the Permanent Secretary to the President, Mayor Emma Pelwetets. And of course I just love at this very moment to continue where we left off. PSP, we do apologize for cutting you off earlier on, but just to continue with the conversation that we had, the President made a lot of pronouncements and even announcements in terms of the way government should be moving. What are the biggest takeaways for government in hindsight, and obviously in looking forward to the type of government that Botswana needs in this new administration?
Yes, thank you very much for having me back. I think it's very obvious that we put Botswana first, basically, just to put them first. That means inclusive growth. And that talks to what you called the democratization of wealth. And that basically means that as we grow this wealth, let's not leave Botswana behind. And later on, you asked me, how are we preparing ourselves as a government? We are very focused in terms of looking at our institutions currently to repurpose them and make sure that they are fit for purpose. Secondly, we are looking at our laws and reviewing our laws with a view to saying, probably we've been doing things have worked for us before, but are they working now? What can we do to make sure that we revise our laws, we revise our regulation procedures so that they are fit for purpose as well? We are also looking into strategic partnerships. I'm talking about both internally and internationally. As the stock exchange has already done, they're setting the pace. And we believe that other businesses should also set the pace. We are looking at our policies. Right now we are looking at a decentralization policy from the Ministry of Local Government and Traditional Affairs. And we are looking at it and saying we should empower local authorities to make decisions, to take decisions, to lead our people at the local level. These are some of the things that we are looking at. We are looking at empowering the workers. When we talk about human capital development, this is where we are looking at. And somebody just raised the question earlier on to say, what does it take for a public officer to work in a private sector and vice versa. That is called an exchange program. We are working on exchange programs, and I want to attest to you that we have already done it. A few of them, as they may be, but we have already done it. If you recall, we have already had an officer from Botswana working for government currently. We are having an officer from Anglo-American seconded to government already. So we need to have more of those so that they're able to pick and make this government a better government. So an inclusive growth basically means let's democratize the world and let's not leave Botswana behind.
In terms of also not leaving Botswana behind, we heard the president also mentioning the aspirations about the National Development Plan 12. Yes. In terms of that crafting of the national plan, yes, involving all stakeholders at all levels. Yes. What does that look like, and how can we expect it to take shape?
It's going to be a bottom-up approach, like we always say. It starts with the local authorities, of course, from the village development committee level. Because we need to make sure that we give Botswana what they want, rather than what government wants to give them. So it's always about not government giving them, but what they want from government. So it's going to be a bottom-up approach. We are setting up the structures. We are making sure that all that comes through up to ministerial level, and then we consolidate from that end. And we have set up the structures, like I say, there's a committee already in place chaired by the Vice President, Rakaolatli, and we are hoping that very soon we'll have a draft of the National Development Plan 2.
And there were so many solutions that were put to the president coming from the business community. And one of them, which I thought was very interesting, was one of the community members mentioned the fact that the need to resuscitate the national of doing business, the committee of doing business. Yes. What can we expect there in terms of, obviously it seemed to be an instrument that was very important then, and obviously now the need for it to be resuscitated. What are the expectations there in terms of its stipulations and its role in bringing about the change?
Yes. Political will is one of the most important powerhouse that you can ever have. When you know that, the first citizen of this country is committed, basically all of us will rally behind it. And I'm saying this because some of these committees, like he was saying, are very much at operational level. We have long done that, and it worked for us probably before. But now we are elevating, and by elevation, obviously, if it's the head of state that is chairing that committee, you can imagine what will come out of it. It means now thinking strategically at that particular level and making sure that all the hurdles, because he can easily say to a minister, do this, do this, do this. Unlike if you are an officer. So I think it's a good thing, and I think it's very progressive.
Talking about progression as well, being progressive, the next 3 years have been earmarked for change.
Yes.
And in his words, in the president's words, spectacularly different, making Botswana spectacularly different.
Yes.
What can Botswana expect? We're looking at a population of over 2.5 million. Every Botswana is included in this whole value chain. Botswana, PSP.
Change, lives of Botswana will change, definitely. We are talking about, people investing here in Botswana. We need to work very hard on the climatic condition of Botswana so that we attract more. Businesses have a lot of money, and they're really willing to come and assist us. Like I'm saying, we are open. Now, we are open such that we are able to even attract those institutions that can come and handhold us. Because we don't claim to be having the knowledge in the world. And therefore, because we are open, and our president has actually been open, we think that we can take this government to a higher level.
And we do expect that it would be more inward than in the past, because you did mention the fact that in terms of even investors that have been coming in, there was a lot of focus on people coming in as opposed to leveraging the opportunities that are here as well.
Yes. We are very much in line with that, and we are saying that we shouldn't only look at the businesses that are outside. What about the businesses that are in? Because we need to grow our SMEs, isn't it, to a very higher level. And that will mean also being intimate to what is happening currently and make sure that the conditions, the business conditions in the country are conducive for both that are already in as well as those that are coming. inside the country. So we very much appreciate that, and we want to believe that working together with a powerhouse organizations that are coming to us to want to have this journey with us, I think the sky is the limit for me.
PSP, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And of course, that was the permanent secretary to the president, Emma Piloetetsi, of course, giving us insights and basically rubber stamping what the president, Advocate Duma Boko, had to say in its various sentiments made, pronouncements, and even commitments towards, the outlook of Botswana, and of course, what she aspires to be in the future, and with regards to her transformation drive. And of course, I think it is necessary at this point to speak to the business community, different individuals who, of course, have also their key takeaways, and of course, in terms of their contributions to the whole value chain of transformation. But of course, in terms of, the sentiments made by the president, what do they mean? And of course, we do have Mayor Christina Lesego at this very moment, who of course is the Weber president, and we're looking at the Women in Business Association. Mayor Christina Lesego, there's so many takeaways. Botswana, the business community, women and young women, older women, across the board. What are your biggest takeaways from what the president said? What various stakeholders had to say. We had Business Botswana. We are yet to have BITC as well. What are your biggest takeaways there?
Thank you, nka bua ke re so se tona se leng gore ke se nka se lebogela ke gone gore the high level community e go buang ka yone e leng gore ke yone le gore ka bontsi ha o ka lebella batho ba Women in Business Association tiro rena e tona is advocacy yone ya gore melao e dirwang di melawana yote e be le gore e kgona go dira gore there's that inclusivity e leng gore bomme le bone ba tsaya karolo mo se se diragalang mo lehatsheng kana mo ke tla the economy of Botswana. Yano ke leboga thata gore tautona a ba tsere seemo seo kana commitment ya go bua re ke busetsa back that high level community of doing business e leng gore ka yone ga se gompieno hela jaaka le bona gore gongwe dipotso ga a kgona go di tsaya tsotlhe, mme ke gone ko e leng gore o ka kgona go interacta teng le rona le batho ba di-business gore se e leng gore se tswa ko tlase kana we are talking about Batswana ba e leng gore tsatsi le tsatsi ba kopana le dikgwetlho mo dikgwebong tsa bone, mme go le thata gore ba ka di bua kae, go le thata gore jaaka ntse utlwa go buiwa le gore re kopana le maphata a government a e leng gore ke batho ba bua ka business le gore re dire business jang, mme bangwe ba bone ba sa direla lone business ba tsetse dikgwetlho tsa teng in depth. So la o bua le bona ga ba tsiboge jaaka motho e leng gore go mo kgwebong o ka tsiboga ka teng. Yaano one of the things e leng gore ke tsaya gore se segolo se ke bona se ka diragala ke gone gore e be e boelela e leng gore re ka kgona time to time re bua le tautona a kgona go araba dipotso dingwe, a kgona go ntsha some impediments on the way hela ka go bua hela re I commit, I do something like that. So ke tsaya gore it's one of the major things e nka buang ka yone e leng gore ne ke dumela gore in the past ne re dumela gore ne be re ka thata especially for us bone ba advocacy mo e leng gore ga gona mosola gore bentse re ra go buela batho inclusivity, basadi ba ska ba sala go morago, basadi a ba thusiwe re lebela dikgatse di tshwana le tsone tsa madi ke tsone di tsene gore bomme ba ke dikgwetlho tse ba kopanang le tsone. Advocacy ya teng gore ba kopana le dikgwetlho ke tse mme go hela mo phegong ba hela ba sa thusiwa. Re bona ke le ga nna le bo gender affairs ba heletse kae, ba heletse mo phegong, mme bomme ba ntse ba teng go tase kwa ga ba kgone go tsenela sentle mo dikgwebong.
Gongwe mo putsong e khutshwane hela gongwe go buile le ka dikgang tsa legal framework gore gongwe ga go ka tolosa molao go gongwe go ka nna botoka in terms of capacitating but bomme ba leng gore ba ira dikgwebo bone ha re le ka lebella dikgang tsa semolao re ka re go ka tokahatswa eng segolo bogolo se se ka thusang.
Gongwe ka bokhutswane ka tlhalosela ke re mo dikgwebong tsone tse di dirwang ke bomme gongwe ga gane go ka tokahatswa ka he leng gore melao kore go na le melao e leng gompieno e leng gore puso e beile but e diragatsa gore di-business di nne thata gore o di itelele so ga ne le gore melao e ne e ka repisiwa kana ke ta kry bureaucracy ga ke tsore ka e bua ke reng ka Setswana those rate types tse e leng gore go nna thata gore Motswana a tsene mo go tsone gongwe ga ne go ka thoadiwa ga dirwa gore go nne mothogo di-rate types tse dintsintsi tse kana melao ka bontsi e leng gore e kganela dilo e ne e ka emisiwa kana go togatswa ke tsa gore Batswana bomme ka bontsi ne ba ka kgona go tsenela mo dikgwebong mme ba hithelela ba nna part of the economy.
Ke lebogile thata.
Ke lebogile nne, thank you.
And of course, wrapping it up in terms of having a conversation with a woman who represents obviously an organization that is big on advocacy for women, ensuring that women also play a major part in terms of the space, the development space or the business space, in terms of also, they also have insights as to, what could be done, solutions that could help improve the ease of doing a business. And of course, right about this time, it is time for the news. Let's cross back to our station